What are your worst college roommate horror stories? My best friend and I moved into the upper floor of an old mansion in the university town we lived in. I knew he had some mental health challenges, and so did I. We both drank a lot, but hey, it was college. I didn't know he was drinking in the mornings or waking up in the middle of the night for more. I also didn't know until later that he was probably bipolar and unmedicated. One night, after some relatively heavy drinking, though we hadn't blacked out, I went to bed. Around 5 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom. As I passed his bedroom door on the way back, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under it. I looked down and saw it said, "I'm sorry, old toothless," in large, scraggly letters. Immediately, he started knocking on his door. No response. I pounded harder and yelled his name. Still nothing. Fear gripped me as I realized the implications. I was still intoxicated, but my mind raced with possibilities. So I stepped back, crossed my arms over my chest, and rammed the door with my shoulder. The lock on the door tore through the frame, sending splinters flying, but I didn't care. My best friend was inside, unconscious in the bed, and seemed like he hurt himself. On the floor were about 3 empty bottles of various tablets. Sadly, they were mine, not his. A fact that haunted me. Capsules and tablets were scattered around him on the bed and floor. I remembered what I'd learned in first aid and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 and putting it on speaker. Then I grabbed a pair of dish towels, tied them around his wounds, and tried to prop up his legs to wake him. He barely responded. I stayed with him, applying pressure to the wound and gathering the medicine bottles for the EMTs. Within minutes, an ambulance and 2 police cars arrived. The medics took over quickly while the cops questioned me and searched the scene. They found his cutter and collected all the medicine bottles it gathered as evidence. After questioning me further and taking my statement, they eventually left. Walking out with the cops, I joined the others who lived in the mansion, now gathered outside. The police informed me of the hospital he'd been taken to and offered to drive me, since I was still intoxicated. Reluctantly, I accepted, riding in the back of the police car for the first and only time in my life. At the hospital, I sat by my best friend's side as they pumped his stomach and stitched his injuries. Thankfully, the injuries were superficial, and most of the medicine was over the counter, causing minimal damage. I even had to hold him down while the nurses performed a catheterization as there were no male nurses on duty. A strange experience. Around 8 or 9 a.m., seeing he was stable, I stepped outside for a smoke, walking a fair distance from the hospital as per regulations. Sitting on the curb, a white pickup pulled. It was the female officer who had brought me to the hospital. She handed me a brown paper bag containing my friend's belongings, including the cutter. Everything had been processed, and she thought I would have it instead of my friend. It wasn't standard protocol, but it felt right. She then offered to drive me back home in her personal vehicle, going beyond her duty off the clock. My friend survived, and briefly attended a program after leaving the hospital. He moved back in with his parents, and sadly, we drifted apart. It's hard to explain why, but what happened deeply affected me. 3 months later, he passed away. Our friends gathered in my living room, silent and grieving. One friend, who had recently gone through a tough divorce, began to speak and cry. I don't recall the context, but at one point he said, "Gently, gently, gently." I laughed, though it wasn't appropriate or funny. It just happened. I felt terrible about it, apologized, hugged him, and we all shared our sorrow. Even now, 4 years later, I vividly remember the expression of my friend's face and the sound of his voice, "Gently, gently, gently." Sometimes you'll laugh in the face of difficult situations. I don't know why, but it's happened to me too. It's not exactly the right thing to do, but it must be some kind of coping mechanism. Story 2. My girlfriend lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her friend. Both me and her roommate's boyfriend lived there. The girls were getting upset with each other, and things had been going south. Then one day near the end of a Walking Dead episode, we started talking about problems, and talking turned into argument. Things were sad and he pulled a weapon on me. I asked why he would do that and if I had been threatening him by yelling while sitting on the couch. He never pointed it at me, but had it in his hand. My girlfriend pulled me into her bedroom where I called the police. When they got there, we had already gone outside, leaving him alone in the other bedroom. When the police entered, there was a loud bang, and he ended it all. We left that apartment and never went back except to move out. This is the reason why I don't watch The Walking Dead anymore. His girlfriend said he had been thinking of ending it all for months. This is why you get help. Help just means telling people, talking about it. I thought it was just for attention when his girlfriend said he was going to do it. It wasn't. It sucks, knowing you could have done things differently, and it sucks more not knowing if it would have made things better or worse. I've accepted it wasn't my fault. I've moved on. But man, do I wish I would have mentioned it at some point, even as a half joke, so I would know it might be true and could help. Story 3. When I was a freshman, my roommate basically had his girlfriend, who had her own room on her floor, move into our small dorm. They were going at it all the time for 4 solid months. I'd wake up and they were at it. Going to sleep, they were at it. Coming back from class, still at it. It was completely out of hand. It was every day, at least 5 times a day for months. There were boxes of rubber everywhere on his side. I basically couldn't be in my room. One day after a long day, I just wanted to come home, sit down, and play Mortal Kombat with my friends in my room. But you guessed it, the door was locked. Dejected, I went to our lounge and told my friends, I really just want to walk in there, sit down, and play just to spite them. One friend looked up at me and said, why don't you? I was shocked, but then nodded and said, yeah, why don't I? Let's go, boys. Without even knocking, 12 people followed me as I unlocked the door, walked in, and ignored them. I turned on my Xbox and we played for hours. They just sat there dumbfounded. That same week, I changed rooms. The next one wasn't much better, but at least I could be in it. Story 4. My first roommate. Oh, memories. He was very heavy, socially awkward, and definitely psychotic. He often mumbled to himself with shifty eyes, ate my food, and alternated between railing against the evils of religion and trying to get me to join the army of the Virgin or some other Catholic sect. He often lounged around in his tidy-whities and refused to dress if I had guests or girls over. He would just sit down and put a blanket over his lap. I walked in on him doing his thing numerous times, and even using my tissues. He also had long phone arguments with his girlfriend who, according to the wallet photo he had of her, looked like Greedley from Captain Planet. The kicker for me was, when he had a breakdown, I called the RA and a counselor to talk with him while I was writing a paper. He was highly agitated and at one point said, I just looked over at Beetlejuice while he was asleep and thought to myself, I should just take out my tool and unalive him, then myself. No offense, Beetlejuice. I was in the zone with my paper, so I automatically replied, none taken, then did a double take as the horror dawned on me. I exchanged confused eye contact with my RA. I noped out of there as soon as possible and moved to a different floor. Did she look like Greedley, or did he really carry around a photo of an animated character and call it his girlfriend? Please tell me he dated a cartoon character. Story 5. The freshman roommate was an okay guy, but we didn't have much in common. I think the housing department matched us up simply because we both liked ska. The dude seemed rather asexual. He had friends, but never had guests. I couldn't tell if he was gay or straight or what. Keep in mind that in those days, even in the most enlightened circles, some people tried to stay in the closet. One of the things I regret most about college was drinking to excess. I get wasted and remember very little about the night before. One night I was way too hammered. Don't even remember how I got back to my room, but I woke up around 4 a.m. to the oddest dream, which was that while I was passed out, my roommate came over to my bed and climbed on top of me. In that dream, I woke up while he was on his knees. I rolled over and, with one solid push, shoved him across the room where he crashed into his bed in his tidy-whities. I was a lot bigger and stronger than him and sent him flying. I can still see the image of him hitting his bed like it was yesterday. I went back to being passed out and later woke up remembering that weird dream. My roommate was gone. Later that day, I saw him and he had a swollen lip. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I'm not going to say for sure what happened, but a couple of weeks later, one of the guys next door asked me if I wanted to swap roommates and move into his room. And I said yes in a flash. Story 6. In my second year of school, I transferred to an out-of-state school and had to get an apartment because there was no room in on-campus housing for transfer students. The school provided us with a list of other students in the same situation so we could find roommates and go in on a place together. I ended up doing just that with my roommate. Things were great for about 2 years, but then he started going downhill. His grades were slipping, his girlfriend dumped him, and he didn't make the golf team. Poor guy. Around this time, he also stopped contributing around the apartment. No cleaning dishes, taking out the trash, or buying toilet paper. I finally decided to keep my own toilet paper stashed in my room in a locked cabinet. Days went by, no toilet paper appeared in the bathroom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a little over a month. One day my girlfriend was over and needed to use the bathroom. She finished up, washed her hands, and went to dry them in the towel hanging over the toilet when I heard her freak out. The underside of the towel was covered in feces. My roommate had been wiping himself with the towel and hanging it back up. I have no idea how I never smelled it. I ended up throwing the towel on his bed and leaving him to a roll of toilet paper with a note that said, I think you need this more than I do. We never spoke again after that, and when our lease was up soon after, we parted ways. I just cannot even imagine being so miserable or whatever that I would rather wipe myself with the same towel repeatedly than buy some toilet paper. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 7. I live in a large house with my girlfriend and 3 other guys. My girlfriend had a calico cat and one of our roommates, whom we'll call Lenny, had a border collie. My girlfriend's cat had a habit of swiping food if left unattended, and Lenny was known for his excessive drinking and medicine use, often passing out randomly around the house. He wasn't fond of cats, being more of a dog person. For a while, I had suspected him of taking Angel, the cat, into his room and terrorizing her like some sort of child, but I was never capable of substantiating that concern. However, I could have never imagined what ended up happening. It was only Lenny and I in the house, and it was in the basement, an unfinished cellar really, tending to my hydroponic garden. And I realized I had left the basement door open. I was concerned that the cat may have gone in, and I didn't want to lock her in the dark, damp basement. I went upstairs and started searching for her. I looked in her usual spots behind the couch, in the clothes hamper, on my bed, but she was nowhere to be found. I went back downstairs thinking she may have actually gotten locked in the basement when I heard a raspy and long meow. The sound was coming from the bathroom. I found her lying in the shower stall with little drops of liquid down her hind legs. She was dragging herself into the corner with only her front paws. I went to pick her up, and when I did, her left rear leg just flopped over her backside. Her leg was clearly broken. I had to take Angel to the animal hospital where I was informed she suffered blunt force trauma to her left rear side, breaking her femur. They said it was similar to when they see animals hit by cars. I asked if there was any chance it could have been Lenny's dog. I was told that none of the trauma was indicative of dog attacks. Angel never goes outside, even if the door's wide open, so there was no way it could have been a car. Plus, how would she even have gone back in the house on her own? Lenny was the only suspect at this point. He was the only one in the house. He didn't like the cat. He was drunk and on pills at the time of the incident. I had witnessed him being slightly cruel to his own dog. I asked the vet if a person could have done this damage. The vet said someone would have had to have kicked or thrown her against something solid extremely hard. Angel was about 13 years old and not in the best of health. My girlfriend and I did not have the money to cover a $5,000 surgery, so we had to put Angel down. I got home and I discussed everything with the other roommates, and then we approached Lenny. Lenny was a horrible liar with an easy tell. He would never look you in the face when he lied. He, of course, denied doing anything with crappy excuses and immediately blaming other people in the house. We gave him 72 hours to vacate the premises, and he complied. That was the last I ever saw of Lenny. Story 8. My wife, who was my fiancée at the time, rented a house for a semester with 2 other girls who turned out to be difficult to live with. My wife owned most of the household items: TV, couches, tables, plates, washer and dryer, PC, you name it. During that semester, these girls managed to mess up nearly everything. They scratched up the non-stick pans, damaged the printer, and broke most of the dishes. They had an issue with me being around, although I mostly stayed in my wife's room when I visited. We both had busy schedules. She had 2 part-time jobs and was a full-time student. When we had free time, we preferred to spend it together. Maybe they thought I was standoffish, who knows. On the other hand, their boyfriends practically lived there, using the washer daily for their laundry. I never used it. Things got worse when my wife stopped buying groceries because the guys were eating everything in the fridge. This irritated me. So after my reserve weekends with the Marines, I started showing up in full gear, muddy combat boots and all, staring down at the guys like I dared them to say something. They never did. When my wife finally moved out and we got our own place, her friend and I helped move everything. It was winter break, so the girls weren't home. They had left their stuff in the fridge, so I neatly stacked it all on the floor. I also moved their belongings from the table to the floor and piled the clothes from the dryer where they should have been folded. It was a subtle way to show them that without my wife's contributions, they had nothing. It was a small act, but it still makes me smile when I think about it. It was my way of saying screw you to a couple of entitled girls who couldn't see past their own needs. And the best part, I never had to see those girls again. Story 9. I had this roommate, let's call him Samwise. I first realized he was a little weird when he would come home drunk and play Guitar Hero. That wasn't too bad, but he would start performing poorly and giving his fingers full-blown pep talks. The one day he returned after getting completely wasted and decided he urgently needed to use the bathroom. However, in his intoxicated state, he got the order of operations mixed up on how to walk there. Samwise stood up, pulled down his briefs to his knees, and attempted to walk out the door to the bathroom. He stumbles outside the door and I heard grunting noises. He pushed and grunted until finally letting out a long sigh of relief. He came back inside, wiped himself with a t-shirt and settled down for a long night of snoring. The next morning when I left, there was a lovely surprise outside the door. A brown nugget, and 3 annoyed cleaning staff members playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who would clean it up. Samwise was so drunk, he never knew the plight of the 3 who cleaned his mess in the hallway. As the semester ended, Samwise showed up drunk again. He forgot how to use his key and shouted this to me at a bright and early 4:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. I ignored his drunken rambling, hoping my RA would call campus police, but no such luck. Eventually, I opened the door before everyone on my floor turned against me. But the adventure wasn't over yet. For Samwise needed to use the bathroom once again. He had learned from the last time, though. He would not fall in the hallway again. He stood up, looked around, and decided to drop his tighty-whitey straight to the ground. He stumbled forth into the hallway. exposed for all to see. I followed with a blanket, regretting not staying in bed. Instead, I was ensuring Samwise wasn't dead in the bathroom. The sun began to rise on a brand new day as I stood in that hallway. A beauty from down the hall woke up, wondering about the commotion, with cute bedhead hair and all. I warned her to go back. Samwise was stirring. His 250 pounds of shame emerged from the bathroom, and this was not something she wanted to witness. But alas, she was too late. Her mind still fogged and drowsy. Samwise stumbled out right in front of her, his manhood as visible as the whites of her eyes. She ran away, never to be seen again without a grimace of dismay. Samwise moved out shortly after, and I was happy as could be. The staff knew about the ordeal with Samwise and decided for the rest of the year my room would be just mine. Story 10. First semester, freshman year. The first roommate was the worst. He hailed from the coal region of Pennsylvania at 6'5" and around 260 pounds. All of this unfolded in that initial semester, and I moved out before Christmas break. The first time I saw him without a shirt, I noticed he was covered in circular wounds. I asked about them. Apparently, he and his high school buddies would have bonfire parties and brand themselves with hot bottles and lighters. Once he was upset over not being able to reach his girlfriend back home. He smashed things and raged one moment, then sobbed the next. Around midnight, he finally got her on the line. He chewed her out, but quickly became embarrassed when he remembered she was at a wrestling match. One night, he and a high school friend stumbled into our dorm room. They were intoxicated, but behaving strangely. Turns out they had each downed 4 bottles of Robitussin and were hallucinating. His friend sat on my bed, mumbling about being eaten by a demon. I promptly kicked them both out. And the best one yet, he decided to hang a huge Confederate flag in our dorm window, right by the dumpsters everyone used. Again, being the prick he was, he admitted to me that he had no Southern ancestors. He just wanted to annoy people off, he said. With black relatives of mine, this was the last straw. I started making plans with my friends to move out. Dorm phone numbers could be figured out by room numbers. One day, a visibly large black dude called when I happened to be alone and inquired about the flag in her room. I told him I despised that thing, but I was only 5 feet tall. He said, no problem, not to tell the racist, and hung up. The following day, 4 muscular black gentlemen knocked on our door. I shook hands with the biggest guy in the center. He asked, did I speak with you on the phone? I replied, yep. He nodded to his friends. This guy's cool. Hey man, you should take a walk. Yeah, I think I'll do that. As I left, I glimpsed the fear in my roommate's eyes as my new friends entered our dorm room. I sat in the lobby with some guys who would later become great friends. The 4 men returned, the flag now balled up. They invited us to hang out and party that night. Cool guys. They definitely roughed him up a bit, but they were smart about it. No broken noses or anything. My roommate and I didn't speak at all after that. We still had a month left in the semester. He dropped out the following semester. What's the most NSFW thing you've seen in your school or college or university or life? I posted this a while back, but my high school had a set of bathrooms out by the football field. While you could go to the bleachers or something for lunch to hang out, not many people did since it was hot as hell with no shade. One day there was a long line from the men's bathroom, like 20 people in line outside the actual bathroom. Turns out there was a girl giving whistles in the back stall. Her and the kid that got caught in the act were expelled, I think. The girl allegedly had been kicked out of a few other high schools in the area for inappropriate acts. Looking back, it's actually pretty sad and probably a sign of neglect. I knew the kid caught and a few others in line. He was totally in line, wasn't he? Story 2. During my senior year of high school, I took an elective class in forensic science, taught by a retired police officer. He was genuinely one of the kindest and most authentic teachers I ever had, and he has since passed away. However, he might have been a little too candid with our class, as he didn't want to sugarcoat the realities of crime and incarceration. He often shared information and videos that, in hindsight, were not appropriate for high school students. I recall one video from a prison security camera showing an inmate being repeatedly harmed. I remember thinking to myself that there was no way a human body had that much red liquid in it. I wanted to emphasize the dangers of knives versus guns and made us watch it twice. I felt sick to my stomach and had a lot of trouble sleeping for days afterward. Somehow, I doubt the school administration was aware that this kind of content was being shared with students, as most of the kids in that class were the delinquent and didn't care types. And they absolutely loved that teacher. They would never report him. This teacher often had former students show up randomly during class to ask for help with legal troubles, and he would go to great lengths to assist them. He was just that kind of person. That being said, it was quite eye-opening for me. The fairly sheltered or AP or honor student who only took the class because I had an extra slot open my senior year. Honestly, I learned more about real life in that class than any other. Story 3. During high school health class, our very Christian teacher, who blushed throughout the entire unit, showed us a video of an actual birth. About 60 seconds after the baby emerged, leaving all the expected aftermath, the teacher exclaimed, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Okay, that's certainly enough." and grabbed the remote to stop the videotape. Yes, this was a while ago. However, instead of pressing stop, she pressed rewind while the video was still playing. We then saw a newborn baby appear to go back in fast motion. Every student in our classroom screamed, and every female student reacted in shock and fear. Perhaps that's why many of us are still childless. Story 4. As a high school senior, I visited my university during rush week and went to a party at my dad's fraternity. There was a long glass wall separating the main room where a foam dance party was happening, from the outside courtyard where there was beer and people socializing. Inside the foam, visibility was very limited. At one point, while I was outside, I saw a person pressed against the glass. They were engaged in an intimate moment, seemingly thinking they were hidden by the foam, but they were quite visible to those outside. Or they just did not care. Story 5. In my high school drama class, we had one changing room for costume fittings. The male and female students would take turns using it. One day I went in to change as I was the only male student not yet in costume. All the girls in my class then proceeded to come in and start changing while I was still there, seemingly unconcerned by my presence. One of them even made eye contact with me while changing. All of them knew I was already in the room as they had watched me enter. A couple of them even complimented my garments, which felt like a nice compliment, clearly indicating I wasn't seen as a threat. Needless to say, I learned a lot about my classmates that day. Story 7. I didn't witness this, but the entire school heard about it. The grade level above ours, high school, went on a field trip aboard charter buses. For some reason, a group of guys in that class decided to have a contest to see who could finish fastest while in the bus's restroom. Allegedly, a few of the female students assisted them. The chaperoning teachers found out about it while it was happening. Apparently, one teacher started crying. It was quite a scandal, but that class was always involved in unusual situations. Story 8. One evening, while walking through an inner courtyard of a building, I passed a window with its shutters open and the light on. Inside the room, a couple was in an intimate moment. The woman caught my eye and seemed to intensify her movements, maintaining eye contact with me. It lasted a few seconds before I looked away and continued on my way. I left feeling a bit embarrassed and positively stunned. I'm pretty sure she was into it. Story 9. In high school and warm days right before the school year ended, we would have gym class on the football field. I was surrounded by a track with a fence around the entire thing, about chest high. I was the only person able to jump over it. My friend tried once and the back of his shorts got caught on it. They ripped halfway off, leaving him hanging upside down by the waistband. His entire name and address were visible not only to the whole gym class, but also to the huge windows of the classrooms that overlooked the field. Story 10. Very mild. I was at a track meet, and a high school girl tried to pull her sweatpants off in one sweeping motion, but unintentionally managed to grab everything and pull it down to her knees. I wish I could report that I said something witty or funny, but being a complete nerd, I went white as a sheet and pivoted 180 and walked off, pretending like I hadn't seen a thing. Story 11. In college, I attended a few parties where people became quite uninhibited. I vividly remember seeing a girl on the dance floor in a compromising position with someone. I also witnessed people using substances. These were quick ways to realize who I wasn't compatible with as friends. Also, during college summers, I worked at a clubhouse with a pool and restaurant in a gated community. I looked out the bar window to see two people engaged in an intimate act in the pool, about 100 feet away from the outdoor restaurant patio where people were having dinner. Story 12. I went to Flagler College in St. Augustine, FL, which is located in a beautiful Gilded Age building. I happened to be dressed nicely, getting mentally prepared for a creative reading some of us were giving. I found myself needing to use the restroom, and the closest one was the beautifully restored original, full of marble, brass, and period fixtures. Anyway, I walked through the door, only to find, on the very ornate, very marble row of sinks, a couple engaged in an intimate act. The young man proceeded to panic and ran to hide in a corner of the bathroom, leaving the young lady on the counter, looking very much like a scene from an adult film. I knew the girl casually, so I waved and burst out laughing at the absurdity of the moment, then turned and left the bathroom. Story 13. I once worked as an evening overnight security guard at a university residence complex. It consisted of 3 towers, 31 floors in total, with over 1,000 residents. We had our own cafeteria, bar, corner store, pizza kitchen with room delivery, weight room, study spaces, library, and a games room or arcade, among other amenities. They also had a steam room and tanning beds. I observed many students, some partially dressed, using the tanning facilities. Additionally, I frequently had to check on students who attempted to be intimate in the steam room, only to become lightheaded or pass out. This happened probably once or twice a semester. As I was a current student living in the residence, I was the same age as everyone else. I didn't need to seek out entertainment elsewhere. My job provided plenty of interesting observations. Story 14. In university, my professor was sharing his PC screen for the lecture. At the start of the lesson, he was discussing exam dates and opened the Windows Start menu to look at the calendar. He was probably unaware that Windows 11 provides the slideshow photos stored in the PC. This resulted in a selfie of him in a compromising position appearing on the screen. I felt really bad for him because the screen was also being shared with students following the lesson remotely. I spent most of the lesson debating whether I should have told him about it. In the end, I didn't, and I believe he's still unaware of what he shared with almost 200 students. Story 15. While not as over the top as some of these stories, I have a personal favorite that spanned an entire semester. I took a civil law course in college, and I knew I was in for a good time when, on day one, the professor introduced himself. I'm Dr. So-and-so. Don't call me that. I hate that formality. My name's Frank. The entire class revolved around a fictitious lawsuit, and the final was a mock trial, while the class split into two teams. The case was made up entirely on the spot, so I spent an entire semester preparing to prove that just because a public figure was engaged in a compromising situation when he collided with another vehicle, it didn't mean he was at fault. When it finally came down to the trial, half my team spent the night passing a bottle of water that clearly contained vodka. Things dragged on longer than anyone expected. Eventually, Frank looked at the clock, stopped whoever was speaking, and said, "You know what? I've been here long enough. Forget it. Everyone gets an A. Now let's go to the bar." That was truly the best class ever. Story 16. During my senior year at a rural high school, we had an after-prom gathering at a hunting camp. About 40 of us attended. A junior and her boyfriend showed up and proceeded to drink excessively. She became very interested in our Argentinian exchange student and tried to initiate intimacy with him. She led him over a hill, and about 5 minutes later, the exchange student quickly walked back to the main group. He indicated that he wasn't comfortable with what she was suggesting. She then came back up the hill, visibly upset because no one wanted to be intimate with her. Her boyfriend then rushed up, and an intoxicated argument about their dissatisfaction ensued. They managed to separate him from her, and the girls helped her get dressed. She passed out soon afterward. May 1988. The boyfriend is now in prison, serving a life sentence for a tragic incident involving his father about 10 years ago. She is currently the chair of the Town Betterment Committee and organizes the July 4th Halloween and Christmas parades. We never speak of that night. Story 17. During lockdown times, while doing remote lessons, my professor was sharing a screen on Zoom as I was working on homework for an art class. I didn't have a webcam, or at least that's what I told them. While shading a detail, I looked up at the video and noticed that the tabs opened in the screen. They contained suggestive titles. My eyes widened and I quickly took a picture, sending it to a friend. My friend immediately told me to DM the professor to minimize the damage. As I was starting to panic, I quickly sent a message saying, "Hey, stop streaming your screen immediately. Check your tabs." Soon after, he handed the screen share for technical reasons. I sat there, muted, nervously laughing, still looking down at my half-finished art. I waited a few minutes before leaving the class midway through, as I was just too distracted to focus on our formulas after seeing that. The worst part is that the professor looked exactly how you'd imagine an older college professor who was caught doing something like that right before class would look. It really confirmed some stereotypes. Story 18. On a poorly lit highway known for speeding traffic, someone was towing a boat full of people. The boat came off the trailer. I drove up to the scene on my way home late at night just as police and other first responders were laying out white sheets everywhere, trying to block off the worst parts of the fire trucks. The boat and debris were spread down a mile or two of dark highway. I had to slowly navigate through it in my car with my headlights on and windows down because my AC was out, driving onto the grass to avoid the sheets and various fragments. I saw disturbing sights, illuminated by tower lights, patrol car spotlights, and my own headlights. I witnessed things I was not prepared for at 17 years old. Fortunately, 25 years, along with alcohol and a few years of regular grass use, have mostly erased the worst parts. Every now and then, I still have an odd nightmare, though. Story 19. This story was just shared on Thursday. It's not mine, but I think it fits. I work at a university, and yesterday we had a big staff development day. It was admittedly a very good event. They went all out. We held it in our event center, and they even used a non-university catering service to ensure none of our food service staff had to work. We had 2 past presidents come to speak. One was just the second woman to be president of a university in our state. She told a story about the streakers on campus back in the 90s while she was president. She admitted it was pretty comical, but it was starting to get out of hand. It had been going on all week, and they managed to catch wind of one of the streakers' plans. He was going to his dorm in one corner of campus, run through the middle of the campus past the library, administration building, and old science building, and then a van would be waiting for him in the parking lot of the mathematics and language arts building. The administration didn't do anything to prevent his run, but they did have a plan. As he made it to the parked van, the back doors opened and he jumped in, still completely unchanged, of course, only to end up right in the lap of the dean of students. She said, and that took care of the streakers. Here's the sweet 85-year-old past president telling the story, giggling the whole time. We were all laughing hysterically. She's a hoot and sharp as a tack. Story 20. In many fraternity and sorority houses, instead of having a bed in every bedroom for each person, Multiple people might share a room, keeping their belongings there, but everyone sleeps on the very top floor, often called a sleeping porch. My fraternity had 4 sleeping porches, one for each class from freshman to senior year. The freshman porch had 14 bunk beds, so we had 28 beds all in one open space. Fraternities on our campus allowed women to stay the night, but men couldn't stay at sororities. Naturally, a lot of intimate activities occurred in the sleeping porches. While most people put up bed sheets as a privacy barrier around their beds, many students simply engaged in activities without any sheets up. Their philosophy was, if everyone else has sheets up, I basically do too. Anyway, I witnessed a lot of intimate moments happening when I was walking in or out of the sleeping porch. Story 21. I had a professor in college for an Asian films elective who had a knack for showing incredibly unsettling films. A lot of people stopped showing up after one particular film. The following quarter, it turned out she had also been dismissed from the college due to some public statements she made. This wasn't during class, but apparently it happened on campus. Another Asian studies or writing teacher actually played a significant role in her termination, and that's how most of us found out. It was a very strange situation. Initially, I lived in a student dorm with 3 other girls at a similar grade level. After 2 quarters, I moved into a 2-person apartment because one of my roommates had an extremely cruel boyfriend. Despite being on the football team, the university didn't take action against him, even after the police were called 4 times in a single quarter. Some of the issues caused by him included, he frequently gained unauthorized access to a room, even though he wasn't supposed to be in the building, a rule enforced only by the police, not the university, for some reason. He ruined our microwave with a metal soup can. I'm still not sure if it was on purpose, but when it exploded, he reacted by grabbing a towel, placing it over the metal, trying to put it back into the microwave, and then turning it back on a second time. We no longer had a microwave after that. He regularly allowed other individuals into our apartment. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning, my room was locked, to find people I wasn't even sure were students, and therefore not allowed in the building, sleeping on my couch. It was cruel towards my roommate on multiple occasions, which was why the police were initially called. Sometimes, he would take her close, leaving her unable to leave the dorm room. His behavior alternated between being a general nuisance and genuinely dangerous, almost as if he had multiple personalities. This ranged from being an annoyance by playing video games on our TV at an extremely high volume to serious incidents like breaking and entering and other concerning acts. There's a lot more I could say about that last part, which made me scared enough to leave the entire building. However, I don't believe the university ever ultimately disciplined him, seemingly prioritizing sports, like most universities do. If you're enjoying the video though, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. During my freshman year of high school, we had an aquatics elective where we swam and played games in the pool every morning. There was this beautiful blonde freshman girl who wore a different bikini every day. One day, we were playing King of the Raft, using an overturned rubber raft, where the person on top tries to keep others from getting on. She was the king, and was moving and kicking her legs energetically while laughing. Suddenly every boy started playing because, unbeknownst to her, her bikini had shifted. It certainly made our day. As we got dressed after class, it was all the boys were talking about. Story 23. All of these stories are from high school. Our biology and intimate ed classes were somewhat combined. Our teacher had us watch a video of a woman giving birth. It was raw footage, straight to the point. The twist? It was her giving birth. Before you ask, yes, the school had cleared it for her to show, but that certainly wasn't included in the permission slips. Intimate activities in bathrooms were common, of course. The choir room, however, was a particular hotspot. I participated in that one myself. Otherwise, you'd see other things at parties. I'm not a shy person and was comfortable participating in that kind of stuff. And there was more unusual behavior, like people inserting fireworks into various parts and setting them off. Really strange things. I grew up in a rural area, so most people started working at 14 or even younger. I started working when I was 8 years old. A friend was working at a local bar as a busboy. I went to hang out and saw a couple of teachers using substances on each other. We also had, sadly, several teachers who would get into relationships with students immediately after they graduated. That's alarming. They aren't employed there these days, but one guy in particular was known for it. He was also married with about 6 kids. Definitely weird and unsettling. It's pretty wild in retrospect. For reference, this would have been decades ago. Certainly not recent. Story 24. I worked at Chipotle in college, which was located in a block with many bars and restaurants popular with students on weekends. I was working a closing shift, and we closed at 11 p.m., so I was out pretty late. I decided to cut through an alleyway to get back to my dorm. As I walked, I saw a couple engaged in an intimate act, leaning over a car trunk. This was in the middle of winter in upstate New York, so it was probably around 20 degrees. I honestly give them credit for that. Anyway, I put my head down and kept walking. Story 25. Not college, but at a sports restaurant I worked at many years ago. We had satellite dishes for the games. Yes, that long ago. We also had our own version of a Norm Peterson character. who was the satellite guy and had run up quite a barbell. So in exchange for having a large chunk of his bill forgiven, they got him to enable all the good channels. One night, the general manager and his girlfriend stayed after everyone else had left. The next day at opening, the front of house manager's last task was to turn on the TVs in the place by just pressing the button as she walked by. There were about 30 of them, but none had the sound turned on. She just walked by, clicked it on, went to the next one, and so on. I went out to check if the bathrooms had been cleaned by the dishwasher, and when I came back through the dining room, they already had a table of about 10 older women, part of a Red Hat Club type group. Right next to them, on the TV above a booth, was a scene involving a woman and multiple men. I had to keep my cool, not attract attention and do the old scratch my head or reach up and turn it off trick. Somehow those women were too engrossed in their conversation to notice me or what was on the screen. It turned out at least 10 other TVs had the same movie playing. The front of house manager was mortified when I told her. She was frantically trying to find anything safe to tune to while I went around rapidly turning off TVs. That was a memorable morning. Story 26. It definitely provided quite a memorable experience for a faculty member at my high school. I was spending time with a girl, and since our opportunities were limited to school hours, we'd found a few discreet spots around campus. One of these was the room leading to the elevator that was exclusively for students with disabilities. One day, as we were in an intimate moment, the door opened and a faculty member responsible for those students caught us. She immediately started yelling and ran off to get help, likely from the shock. She left a girl in a wheelchair just sitting there. She smiled and waved to her as we left, and she seemed content to have the moment to herself. We never got in trouble or were called out for it, which is surprising considering all the cameras on campus. In retrospect, that faculty member's reaction was quite extreme and out of proportion. I'm sure whoever she found just dismissed it. Story 27. Not something I saw, but something I heard about. The story was shared with us by the security team in charge of handling the CCTVs at our university. When the CCTVs were first installed on campus, students and professors didn't really get the memo, even though it had been announced several times. On the first day they were online, there was a significant amount of intimate activity happening across campus. Students, professors, literally everyone in every corner of the university. It was quite widespread. They had a pretty small campus, but they still didn't have enough security to stop everyone. This continued for months until they made another announcement stating, "We have CCTVs now. The security team will see you and will catch you in the act, so don't even think about it." The security guards were mostly disheartened, seeing many students, including young women, engaging in inappropriate behavior with professors, allegedly for better grades. They described situations where attractive students were being intimate with professors, sometimes even during test papers. This happened a few years ago, around the mid to late 2000s, but even during my time in the mid-2010s, they were still catching someone at least once or twice a day. It usually just ended with a knock on the door and a quick departure. They didn't really apprehend these individuals unless they were repeat offenders because they didn't want to publicly acknowledge that such activity was rampant on campus, as that would tarnish its reputation. I'm not surprised, as I know many people who engaged in intimate acts on campus daily and didn't get caught. However, the guard at least confirmed my theory that probably 10% of a class of 40 to 50 students engaged in some form of intimate activity on campus. So in a school with 10,000 students, you would have more or less 1,000 of them engaging in some form of intimate behavior daily. Might not be the same people each time, but roughly 1,000 students would be involved in such activities. Story 28. I decided to go to a party back in high school. Believe me, I definitely had some drinks, but parties were never really my thing. However, my friend convinced me to go, and I thought, why not? The party was fine. I wasn't completely intoxicated, so I was still coherent and able to make reasonable decisions, rather than blacking out and ending up in embarrassing social media posts. Everything changed though when my friend led me out to the deck. The party was hosted at a rich guy's house, so they had a deck, a pool, and other fancy things. There was a scene with multiple couples being intimate, scattered across the deck. Safe to say I had poor self-control back then, and my friend and I shared an intimate moment with a girl. I'm not proud of it, but I was young and partly intoxicated. Apparently in my high school, at every party, there was some section where multiple people were getting frisky. It's kind of odd to think about it now. Story 29. Ironically, I didn't see this happen. During our intimate ed class in high school, we were practicing putting a rubber on in the dark. Our PE teacher brought a plastic banana and removed its layers to reveal the form underneath. I was randomly selected to put that banana in my zipper and be blindfolded as a simulation to put it on in the dark. Halfway through struggling to get the rubber on, the principal called me over the PA system to visit his office ASAP to pick up a parcel. I excitedly took my blindfold off, sprinted past 3 classrooms, and didn't realize that I still had my plastic banana sticking out of my pants, until one of the girls next door yelled, "Your fly is open!" Story 30. During exam season at school, I was studying in one of those large lounge areas with many tables grouped together. Around 10 or 11 p.m., a couple discreetly left the area. This lounge had windows all along one side that looked out into a courtyard. The The courtyard was empty at the time of the night, and on either side of it were several small classrooms. A light came on in one of the classrooms, but nobody really noticed at first. The couple then entered and began an intimate encounter. They didn't realize that while the blinds prevented them from seeing out, the room was completely visible from the outside with the lights on. Word quickly spread after someone noticed, and soon, about 50 people were watching and laughing. Eventually, they finished and came back into the lounge to a huge round of applause. I knew the girl pretty well. She was mortified, especially as people teased her about it for years. I would move schools, bro. Story 31. I went to an elementary school in a district that didn't have its own high school. The solution was that high schoolers were bused 2 towns over to attend their school. Elementary and high school students would get picked up by the same bus, elementary kids would get off at our school, and high schoolers would continue on to theirs. You know it. I got on at my stop, walked to the back to sit with a friend who I'll call the lookout. There, one guy, my friend's older brother, was having intimacy with his girlfriend, and another guy was being intimate with a girl while sitting on the bench seat. I distinctly remember just stopping in my tracks until my friend's brother asked if I was enjoying the show and told me to move along. It was a couple of years before I fully understood what I had seen. Story 32. This happened back when I was in senior high, and it was during PE time. Our room is on the 4th floor of the building. There were about 4 rooms on the 4th floor and a small storage area at the end of the hall. No one else was there at the time, considering that some classes went to their designated stations or subject rooms, and we currently had PE, so everyone was at the gym. When I went back to my room to fetch my water bottle, I saw that one of my female classmates' bags was still in the room. I grabbed it, thinking she might have forgotten it in a rush and that I just texted her about it when I got downstairs. Getting out of the room, I heard rattling sounds in the storage closet, but I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just rats. I walked away until I faintly heard sounds and hushing noises. So I pretended to walk away and slowly tiptoed back to the storage room, trying to be as quiet as possible and keep my shadow from being seen by staying close to the walls. I'm quite nosy, I know. There was a small hole near the door, and when I took a peek, I saw my classmate, the owner of the bag I had with me, and my business ethics teacher, who, mind you, was married and his wife was our organization and management teacher, engaged in an intimate act near the door. Ending, I created an anonymous account on Facebook and sent a recording to his wife. He was fired and likely faced legal action. The girl was humiliated in front of the class by her mom. It's worth noting that she consented and her behavior was also quite forward. Story 33. Not very NSFW, but something that amused me. As a university professor, I once came across a group of students sitting on the grass and sharing a grass whilst I was walking through a quiet part of campus. The boy who was holding it looked up, saw me approaching, yelped, and dropped the grass. He leapt to his feet and started hurting himself whilst his friend sat frozen, staring at the ground. I pretended not to notice. I figured he had suffered enough. Story 34. I was driving east on I-55 towards Chicago, and out of nowhere, I came upon a semi-truck in the left westbound lane that was completely engulfed in flames. It must have just happened, as no first responders were there yet and traffic was heavy, so I couldn't move over. I'd never seen steel melting before. Fire was so intense I was shocked I could feel its heat inside my car as it drove past. When I got home from work later that evening, it turned out the driver passed away. It's crazy how my brain suppressed that, making me believe the driver must have gone out, allowing me to work a full day. Story 35. My professor heard we were going to a bar one night and asked if they could come along. Then they asked if they could ride with me. After that, they asked if I could stop at an ATM for cash. Once we got to the bar, she danced with my friends and flirted with a couple of them. She was over 50, and we were in our early 20s. I ended up getting an A in her class. Once at a college party, a guy was dared to do his party trick. He engaged in a very personal act. At least that's what I was told. I looked away once it became clear what he was doing, as that was proof enough for me. When I was 16, I got my first job as a lifeguard, making $6.25 an hour. A woman over 30 drowned in 3 feet of water. The lifeguard next to me was the first responder, so I assisted. I asked her if the woman was breathing, and right after I asked, she let out a breath. We moved her out of the pool, and firefighters arrived and took over. They told us that breath was essentially her rattle at the worst possible time. Our management told us not to talk to anyone about it, even our families. Then we were told we could call an 800 number for a talk session, or we could meet up with a fireman at the station to process the trauma with him. My coworker, also 16, was there for the incident, so she went with me about every other week to play poker and eat ice cream at the fire station. It was so much fun. We did it all summer until my friend told me one of the firemen was asking her inappropriate questions. I got uncomfortable and decided it wasn't helpful anymore, so we stopped going. I think that's probably about it. Story 36. In high school, we had an art gallery event, and a freshman girl decided to display artwork consisting of hand-drawn self-portraits. The school attempted to close it down, but her father, who was a lawyer, threatened legal action, citing freedom of expression. The second incident was at university. I walked past a guy who was on his laptop in a common seating area. The sound was too loud and I recognized the music from an adult animation. I looked at him and he realized I recognized it and paused it. Story 37. Most NSFW things seen in school. One of the girls in the majorette team had a seam tear in her uniform and showed her back to everyone for like a quarter of a second during a halftime show in front of 3,000 people. Most NSFW thing I saw in college. Online class. Had a classmate that seemed to have a real problem with authority. They were meant to critique each other's work, an essay, and then turn in both the essay and the critique to the professor. Her essay was a picture of a poop. Most NSFW thing I saw in life. A motorcyclist was speeding at like 2 a.m. and fell asleep. He crashed into the diesel tanks of a parked semi-truck, which then ignited. I woke up during the collision and rushed outside to find him screaming and rolling around. He didn't make it. Story 38. I finished my shift at 9 p.m. at a supermarket in the city center. I was waiting for the bus at the bus stop, which was across from several pubs. The door to one of the pubs suddenly opened and two women came out onto the street. One was shouting, "If she speaks to me like that again, I'll hurt her," while her friend tried to calm her down. The angrier one of the two then lifted her skirt, squatted down, and began to relieve herself in the street, still ranting about whoever had annoyed her. My fellow bus passengers were all looking on in horror. She then stood up, obviously without wiping, and went straight back into the pub. Story 39. This isn't the typical NSFW incident, but it certainly fits. My buddies and I returned to the residence hall from a party, and when the elevator doors opened, it smelled absolutely awful, like someone had unleashed a terrible odor. The stench was so strong I started gagging. The smell worsened as I went further down the hall. We started knocking on doors to figure out what was going on. We got to the last door and heard a guy let out a sound. I was clearly in bad shape. The door was locked, so we called the RAs, who then contacted campus police and medical personnel. When the RA keyed into the room and opened the door, he nearly passed out from the smell. It took everything he had to stay upright. The guy in the room was so intoxicated that he couldn't move and had messed himself up in bed, which explained the awful stench. Medical personnel went in and had to pump him. Rumor has it his alcohol content was in the high 0.3s. The mattress was a biohazard and had to be discarded. The smell lingered for days. Story 40. I used to work as an IT technician at a large company. I remotely accessed our chief medical officer's company computer to set up a new program and process we were using, perhaps for a VPN, and he asked me to bookmark the site for him. I bookmarked it and then went to show him where the bookmark was. That's when I saw approximately 800 bookmarked adult websites. The work bookmark was added to the bottom of this long list, so he had to scroll down quite a distance, pretending not to see anything just to show him where I was. It was the most awkward minute of my life. Yes, he eventually got fired for it. This was only my second month at my first job out of college. Story 41. When I was in 6th grade, Bill M., the son of a local police officer, brought some magazines. You know what kind it is, to school, and we took pages. I went a step further and cut out the images of the woman, pasting them into a school notebook. That led to an embarrassing ride home, and a call went out to my family, and my stepfather had to pick me up. It was a group incident, originating elsewhere when some 6th grade rat reported everyone, telling the principal I kept pictures in a notebook, which I, of course, denied. My stepfather was a cool guy, but this was an awkward conversation for a 6th grader. Decided to bring up the topic. He mentioned how it's normal to start having certain dreams and asked if any of the women in the magazines were unattractive. Keeping in mind he probably had magazines from the 70s or 80s, chuckled. Oh, and he asked if I'd taken them from his personal collection. I reassured him they were all from Bill M's dad. Even more memorable, my high school girlfriend, whose father was the longtime maintenance worker at the school, shared an intimate moment in the stairwell during classes. It wasn't prolonged by any means, and I still have no idea why we weren't in class and were together. She was a year below me. Story 42. The campus security office asked for volunteers to be part of the fire safety team. We received high visibility vests and red hats, and our main role was to knock on doors and ensure everyone evacuated safely during drills or incidents. Part of the training involved learning how to use a fire extinguisher. To practice, we needed a fire. So they had a steel box about 10 square feet, 1 square meter, and 8 inches, 20 centimeters deep. They put a gallon, 4 liters of gas in it and set it on fire, then instructed us on how to approach it and use a CO2 extinguisher. What they didn't tell us was that when you discharge a CO2 extinguisher, it pushes a lot of air toward the fire first. I was first to try, feeling confident and ready. However, I was apparently too far away when it pulled the trigger. This sent a gust of air directly into the flames, creating a fireball that lit up the quad like high noon and left my face feeling sunburned. Then 2 seconds later, the fire was out, and we were in darkness. Nobody else wanted to try after that. What was your welcome to college moment? I had just moved into my own apartment the summer before my freshman year of college. Since I was a poor college student, the best I could afford was a shared room with 2 other girls.
Time alone was rare, but occasionally my roommates would go out and I would get to hang in the apartment with my significant other. By hang out, I mean we would seize the opportunity to have intimacy and peace. On one particular night, we were in a bit of a rush because we didn't know how long my roommates would be gone, and I completely forgot to close the windows and lock the door. We had a considerably loud and dirty session, and just as I let out my last satisfied sound, I heard my neighbors on both sides start to cheer and clap. I had one window on either side of my bedroom windows, and both apartments were occupied by a few college guys. For a solid minute, I lay frozen like a deer in the headlights as they applauded my grand finale. My significant other thought it was the most hilarious thing that had ever happened, but I just wanted to hide. Story 2. This one happened very quickly. It was the third day of orientation, and I got up early that morning. Since I was already awake, I decided to go out and do something, so I left my dorm and wandered over to a nearby shopping street. I went to a Starbucks, bought a cup of coffee, and then walked back to my dorm. I sat down in one of the easy chairs in the common room, just sipping my coffee and waiting for everybody else to get up. I don't know why, but this simple act struck me as truly amazing. I guess until then, I was used to my life being controlled by other people or things, my parents, school, and so on. In a weird way, this was the first action I'd ever made completely on my own, and it was incredible. It's still one of the happiest moments I can remember. Story 3. In college, I lived in a dorm as a freshman, but moved off campus into an apartment the next year. One night, after getting completely intoxicated and blacking out, I walked back to my old dorm room, assuming it was where I still lived. I climbed onto the top bunk of a bunk bed and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I tried to figure out what had happened and why I wasn't in my own bed. I looked around and saw a guy sitting at his computer. "Where am I?" I asked. He turned, looked at me with a big smile and said, "College, man, college." Story 4. I'll start with my first college experience, which became my "I'm going to like it here" moment. My school's orientation required us to stay overnight in one of the on-campus dorms. It was oven-like in the room, so I decided to go down to the lounge, meet some people, and not even try to sleep. I found a group of people, socialized, and shared stories. By the middle of the night, we were playing Never Have I Ever. The other guys and I were saying some weird things just for laughs, but all the girls in the group had done them. If there were a picture of my face that night, it would be similar to a child's on Christmas morning. Story 5. It was my first weekend living in the dorms, and pretty much everyone went out and got completely hammered. A lot of people, especially the girls, hadn't been intoxicated before and couldn't handle their liquor at all. That night, everyone started coming back to the dorms, trying to act normal as they walked through the lobby as they wouldn't get in trouble. This one girl in a very short miniskirt began pooping down her leg as she walked through the lobby in front of everyone. It hit the floor and left a trail behind her. She then got into the elevator, and the poop continued to get everywhere, on the walls and the floor. The trail led all the way back to her room. I never saw her again, and I'm pretty sure she dropped out of college the next day from embarrassment. Story 6. The night we discovered that Pam cooking spray plus synthetic carpet and duct tape created an indoor slip and slide was probably the best. We all had a lot of fun, and a few socks were ruined in the process. It got even better when a campus policeman told us to wait until his shift ended at 2 a.m. It was a tuba player in the band and had a ton of valve oil. We used it in a long linoleum corridor in the basement for some serious slipping and sliding. We even had the foresight to put out wet floor signs when we were done. I also recall rolling down the hall to my dorm room because I was too intoxicated to stand. I ended up sleeping hunched over my lofted bed since I couldn't climb into it. Story 7. On move-in day during my freshman year, I ate some substance right after my parents left. I watched TV for a while and got situated. After a few hours, the nausea started getting strong, so I ran to the bathroom to purge. For those who don't know, a purge on it consists of 20 minutes to an hour of constant, violent retching, after which you immediately start tripping. So as I was retching, my roommate, his parents, and his younger brother showed up to move in his stuff. His mother started to panic after I had been retching nonstop for what she thought was at least 15 minutes. In reality, it was closer to 30. She insisted on calling an ambulance or one of the RAs, but her husband talked her out of it long enough for me to finish up the purge. I left the bathroom and went to brush my teeth in the small hallway connecting our 2 dorm rooms to the shared bathroom. I got distracted by the bristles on my toothbrush for a minute, and my roommate's mom tapped me on the shoulder, asking if I was okay. I turned around, eyes completely dilated, and said, "Yeah, I'm good." Didn't say anything else to me. She just walked into the dorm room and said to her husband, "No, he's more than fine. He's on cloud freaking 9 right now." Story 8. It was a Saturday night, and I had been in my room for most of the evening. Around 2 a.m., one of my friends called, and we decided to hang out in another building. I went downstairs and saw a body covered with a blanket on the lobby floor, right in front of the security desk. We had to show our IDs to the security guards to get into the dorms. There was also a liquid mush staining in the carpet nearby. I was a little freaked out, thinking someone had passed away and they had just covered it. Nope, it turned out the kid had stumbled into the lobby after a night of heavy drinking, then fell over and retched while trying to give his ID to the guard. This had happened just 5 minutes earlier, so the guard had simply thrown a blanket over the kid while waiting for help to arrive. Story 9. The worst moment was coming back late on a Sunday of my freshman year after visiting family, only to find all the dining halls closed. I made bagel bites alone in my microwave. My roommate was with her significant other, and I started crying because I missed my mom. I realized that nobody would ever care for me the way she does. The best moment was going to a house party that had a water slide, live music, and a mud pit, and an abundance of alcohol. My friends and I wrestled in the mud and shot liquor into each other's mouths with mini squirt guns. An epic dance battle commenced. I realized I would never be able to experience such reckless abandonment outside of college. Story 10. My best college memory isn't some wild party or a crazy roommate story. It's more of an epiphany I had the second my parents dropped me off. Some critical background. I came from a military boarding school, so I went from extreme supervision to total bliss with a summer in between. My parents dropped me off at 11th and High Street, right next to the Panera at the Ohio State University. We'd already moved everything in, ate, and finished all the administrative stuff you do on the first day. I was truly being released. I grew up in a relatively strict family, and my parents were leaving for their home in Chicago right after this. I gave them an epic, last time being under your wing hug. My mom cried with deep passion. My dad and I hugged, chatted, and fist bumped, and that was it. I've reflected many, many times on the feeling inside me as I sauntered the last eighth to a quarter of a mile to my dorm, by myself, for the first time. I made it. This is it. This is college, I thought. Looking around, I realized they're my peers and future friends. This is going to be freaking awesome. It was a picturesque day. 70 to 75 degrees, no clouds, and full of vibrancy. There was so much ahead of me. I've written a handful of songs and poems about it. I finally had the freedom I'd been yearning and painstakingly sticking it out for. As I reflect on it now, the smile on my face is as wide as it can possibly stretch. It's such a fond memory. Story 11. This wasn't my welcome to college moment, but it's a great story. One Saturday morning, my best friend and I woke up and immediately started drinking Red Bull and vodka. We then decided to go to the intimate toy shop in town and blow our paychecks. We got a friend to be our designated driver and continued to drink on the way. By the time we got there, we were pretty buzzed. Our friend found a doll that wraps her arms and legs around you. He bought it and was so excited that he blew it up in the car. He put the doll on his back and she clung to him as he walked around. It was hilarious. We then stopped at the beer store to pick up a 48 pack before heading back to the dorm. I was hammered by this time. When our car pulled into the parking lot, I stumbled out, followed by my friend and his new girlfriend with a beer. The first people we ran into were a girl touring the residence with her parents. As I walked by, I tried to get myself together and smiled at them. Then my friend walked by with a blow-up doll strapped to him and a case of beer in his arms. He smiled and said, "Your daughter is going to love it here. Welcome to college." Story 12. My welcome to college moment was more like a solid week straight. I go to a state school in upstate New York that's known as a huge party school. The first week of classes consisted of drinking and hopping from frat parties to bars, coming home at 3 a.m. wasted out of my mind, waking up at noon, recovering from the hangover and doing it all over again for 6 days straight. I would wake up with numbers from people I didn't even remember getting. And people I didn't know would come up to me during the day asking when we should party together again. And then I nearly failed out of school the first semester and stopped going out as much. Party, but not too hard. Story 13. On my first day on campus, I saw this beautiful, incredible girl getting into a huge fight with a total schmuck. Though I didn't know he was one at the time. I could never get her out of my mind. It was exactly what they talk about in The Godfather. È stato un colpo di fulmine, the Italian saying for falling in love at first sight. Months went by, and while I met and saw other girls, this one always stood out. I later found out she was on a leave of absence for a kidney infection. When she came back to school, still as gorgeous as ever, I spent the next 3 years waving at her from afar at various parties and bars, being a total coward. After 3 years of this, she finally stopped me and spoke to me. Yes, she made the first move. We had a real conversation, and it was about 2 months before graduation. If she hadn't stopped, we would have graduated and gone our separate ways. We hit it off immediately, and now we've been married for 4 years and have a 7-month-old son. Story 14. This is a silly enough place to share the moment my college experience finally said, "Hey buddy, do you know how to fly a plane?" No? Perfect. Here we go. My freshman year started in August 2008. Until that point, I had never had a drink in my life. I was a super sheltered white kid from the suburbs. I'd actually planned on not drinking until I was 21. Realistically, that was never going to happen, but it happened much sooner due to a girl. This is when college hit me like a load of bricks and gave me a heads up if I wasn't going to drive, I was going to crash. It was this girl's 18th birthday and she had met some people who were willing to throw her a party. She asked if I would tag along to help keep her out of trouble. She was very attractive. She had gone to the state finals for a beauty pageant, so she was quite literally a queen. I jumped at the opportunity. Anyway, we drove to this party, which was about a 15-minute drive from our dorm, so there were already some problems. As soon as we walked in, I knew this was it. This was when the proverbial Bronco of college was going to break me, or I was going to break it. The place was a rundown house that was pungent with the smell of grass, and everyone was clearly older than we were. Who did this girl meet? Josh. Crazy 23-year-old Josh. I started calling him Crazy Josh. He's a really nice guy, but just plain old crazy. Well, Crazy Josh hooked us up with some drinks, and so began the night. After about 2 hours, the birthday girl was completely wasted. She took me down to a pool table to make out, which I was fine with, but I told her we couldn't do this and now she was far too intoxicated for it to be okay. I'm proud of that little gentlemanly moment. I took her back upstairs where she started dancing with the other misfit partygoers as I sat back, drank some more and kept an eye on her. I had the same solo cup of beer for the whole time, so I choked down the warm Busch Light and filled up another cup when Crazy Josh started laughing loudly at one of his friends and said, "You freaking guy, you put spikes in the drinks, you schmuck." Crap. Yeah, that would include the one I just downed. At this point in my life, I had zero desire to ever do substances, by the way. Now I'm spiked, and the birthday girl starts retching everywhere. I'm positive she didn't have a drink during the time of the lacing of beverages, which was good, but for the next hour, she's retching and I looked after her. Eventually, he handed me the keys to his apartment, which I had never been to, and said, "You guys can crash at my place." I was hoping no crashing would be involved, so I asked him for directions because God knows I wasn't going to get this girl through my dorm security, let alone make it myself. His directions are ironed into my brain, and it must have been because I was high, too, that I didn't question them at all. You're gonna need to go left, then go right, then go straight, then take a right, then go right, then go right. I said, "Screw it, that's all I need." And I picked up the horribly sick birthday girl, carried her to her car, and literally placed her in the passenger seat. I took the wheel and left. I did end up finding his place because the almost comatose birthday girl had been there before, and she was able to muster enough strength to point and say, "This one." I carried her up the stairs of this random guy's apartment to the third floor because, of course, this guy I just met who handed me his keys had to live on the top floor. I carried her inside and sat down on the couch, gave her a blanket, and then lay on the floor for the next 4 hours. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep. To keep myself from freaking out, I just kept repeating the great words of Dave Chappelle. "Don't freak out. You're on substances, Dave. This is just what substances do." When Crazy Josh got back to his place at 7 a.m., I woke up Sleeping Beauty and said, "Cowboy the heck up. I'm taking us back to the dorms and getting out of here." At least now she could move on her own. She said thanks for the place to stay and left. I took her back to my dorm room where both my roommate and I ran into each other after both getting back from crazy nights. He looked at me, then at the girl I brought back, then back at me and said, "Well, we're here." I replied, "Yeah, we can talk later. We're going to sleep." He nodded and we all passed out. I ended up dating the girl for most of college. To this day, I think she appreciated the fact that I didn't take advantage of her. We broke up my senior year, which was okay. I wanted to be at college and be single, among other problems that had arisen during our time together, but hey, she was my first love and the reason I understand just how crazy the world can be. Story 15. Everyone in my dorm room smoked grass except for me. They just finished a session and, of course, had a major case of the munchies, so all 8 of us squeezed into a 5-person car and went to McDonald's. One guy ordered 20 McNuggets and an apple pie, another got 5 McDoubles, and so on. When it was my turn, since I wasn't spiked, I ordered 2 McDoubles, a McChicken, and large fries. The guy sitting next to me had a huge grin on his face. When we got back, everyone was jokingly asking if I was sure I wasn't spiked. When I said no, they asked, "Why are you trying to make a McMonster then?" I had no idea what that was, so I told them. My friend then took one of my McDoubles, opened it up, and stuck the McChicken inside, creating a monstrosity of a sandwich. That's how I learned that stoners in college know the greatest food secrets ever. Story 16. The first night out with my new flatmates started casually enough with a few beers in the flat. We moved to the student union for a few more beers, but half the group went home. The rest of us continued on to a nightclub. I was the token Irish guy at a UK university, so everybody started playing a little game called Get the Patty Angry. One of my new flatmates began buying me double tequilas. I lost track after the 5th. Apparently, I then ran off. I have no memory of this and got lost for a few hours. Somehow, I managed to make my way back to the flat where the party was still going. Someone handed me what I assumed was a pint of water, and I drank nearly half before realizing it was, in fact, vodka. Then the beer bong came out, and of course, I had to do a few of those too. After that, someone convinced me to eat one of the hottest chili peppers commercially available in the UK. I spent about an hour leaning my head out the window, using a can of beer as mouthwash and spitting it out of a 4th-floor window. Apparently, at some point during the night, I also passed out while standing up, just leaning against my bedroom door. I woke up the next day and managed to make it to my 9 a.m. lecture. Welcome to university. Story 17. During my freshman year of college, I lived in student housing and had a roommate, who we'll call Jim. He was a huge guy who was a former starting linebacker in high school from a rough area. He showed me a video of himself squatting 300 pounds with ease. We hung out for the day and he seemed like a genuinely good person. That night we split up. Since I was a total loser in high school and had never been to a party, I just hung out with a few other people at the rec center for a ping pong tournament. I went to bed at around 11 p.m. and Jim wasn't there. I woke up at 8 a.m. to the sound of him walking in, passing out on his bed. I looked over and noticed a hospital tag on his wrist and a bandage in his forehead. It turns out he'd had a very interesting night. He had apparently partied pretty hard and was heading back at around 2 a.m. To get back to the dorms, Jim had to walk past the campus police. They were already in high alert after a guy had coded earlier that night, so seeing this huge guy stumbling by, the cops yelled, "Stop where you are!" He stumbled over to them and trushed them. Huge mistake. They tried to take him down, but Jim was a little too strong for them. Managed to get him on the hood of the police car, but in his anger, he hit his head into the Mustang patrol car and left a dent. The most amazing thing is that if you've ever seen a newer Mustang, you know that these cars have roughly 90-degree angles on them and they're extremely solid. Somehow, he stayed conscious, and they ended up having to sedate him to take him down. They took Jim to the hospital for the night. He had an alcohol content of .226. He was suspended from a semester and considered a trespasser in student housing. It was then that I realized what it means to party hard in college and that your parents aren't going to help you get out of your stupid situations anymore. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. A whole campus decided they wanted me to get intoxicated. At one point during my escapades, the campus convinced me that a girl who lived a few floors down below me had taken my ID. I chased her around the student village for 5 minutes. She was laughing. It was fine. Until I finally rugby tackled her to the ground. After picking her up, we all went back to my flat's kitchen. I don't remember much after that. I woke up the next morning in my own bed, which was a surprise in itself. I had stuff in my mouth and there was more writing on me than a decent newspaper. This was the moment I realized I was going to like university. Story 19. My first essay assignment in college. I'd always been great at writing essays in high school, so I figured I'd do some research, as in look up a few things on the internet, for about an hour, and then write the essay in 2 or 3. It was only supposed to be a rough draft, so I figured it was no big deal if I didn't finish it. I turned it in and got it back with a grade of 52, and I was extremely generous. At first, I was shocked. I had never gotten anything other than an A in my entire life. Then I was furious. I thought it was completely unfair. By the time sophomore year rolled around, though, I realized that the professor was totally right. I learned a ton from that professor, even though I really disliked him at the time. My last job was teaching academic and creative writing at a university. Story 20. I was at the beach one night with my friends, just hanging out on a lifeguard tower. All of a sudden, this guy came up and asked if he could sit with us. We agreed and continued lying about whatever, just enjoying the night. Suddenly, he sat up on the railing, pulled out a wooden fife, and started to play. We all just looked at each other, not knowing what to make of the situation. After he finished playing his surprisingly good song, we awkwardly applauded. They asked him his name. He responded, "They call me Mantis Rave." That's all he said. And then he started playing again. My friend, who was pretty spiked at the time, told him, "Dude, you remind me of the Grim Reaper," or something equally ridiculous. Mantis Rave responded, "If I'm the Grim Reaper, then do you fear passing away?" We all looked at each other with pure confusion and continued to sit and listen. Eventually, my stone friend fell asleep right there while Mantis was playing his tune. Mantis then turned to me and said, He fell asleep. They always do." At that point, we said goodbye and left. As we were walking away from the beach, I turned around and saw a silhouette against the moonlight, still sitting on the railing and playing his fife. He was either on something or trolling us. Story 21. It was my second weekend, and everyone from my dorm floor decided to go to a frat party, so we started pre-gaming. I had a 40-ounce bottle of vodka and was taking shots, but I only got about a quarter of the way through it before it was time to go. I put some in my water bottle for the trip over and finished it. Walking through the door was the last thing I remember, but I woke up the next evening, which was Sunday, and somehow still had that water bottle. Ate dinner and went straight back to sleep. On Monday, my first class was a chemistry lab at noon. Before that, I decided to go to the gym. I took the water bottle, without rinsing it, filled it with water, and before I could even get anything done, I took a sip. I tasted the leftover vodka and rushed all over the treadmill. I got out of there as fast as I could. Then came my chemistry lab, where we were working with ethanol. I caught a whiff and started dry heaving. That's when my TA walked up to me, patted me on the back, and his thick Russian accent said, "Welcome to college, my son." Story 22. I had English 2 at 11 a.m., but my computer concepts class let out early one day at 10:30. Completely forgetting I was 30 minutes early, I sat down in my English class while the professor's previous class was still in session. He proceeded to embarrass me in front of about 30 people, who were all laughing. It was then that I realized college was not like high school. There are no bells telling you that it's okay to get into your next class. You either keep up with the schedule or look like an idiot. I'd rather take a walk of shame out of a frat house than do that again. Rest assured, I've never since then made the mistake of not checking the time before I walked into a classroom. Story 23. The first week in my residence hall was pretty interesting. I had this whole idea in my head that dorm life was a crazy place with people having intimacy in the hallways and doing keg stands in the common areas. With all of these American Pie-esque ideas in my head, the first Friday rolled around and everyone was stoked. A bunch of us went out and started drinking around campus, and we inevitably got a little buzzed. Needing more liquor, we started to head back to the dorm. I was feeling confident in my newfound surroundings, and the liquid courage was kicking in. To prove myself, I challenged my friend, we'll call him P, to a good old-fashioned shot-for-shot contest. He obviously accepted. Unbeknownst to me, P was pretty sober. I feel it is important to mention that, being around 140 pounds, I did not have the greatest tolerance and was already more than buzzed by the time we got back. When we got back, we set up with an audience and went at it. First one down, he filled another. Second one down, we waited another 20 seconds, and a third one down. We waited another 30 seconds, then another, then a minute, then another, then 2 minutes, then another. At this point, I called it off because this man was evidently my superior. I later found out that P usually drinks a Mickey in a few minutes to start his night. After having a very uneventful summer, I decided to watch some of the best movies of all time from IMDb that I'd never seen. I ended up watching Fight Club, and I have still never seen a movie that has blown my mind quite like it. I spent the next hour and a half trying to get P to punch me in the face, saying, "It'll be just like Fight Club. Just punch me in the effing face." P, not being a man to let me down, gave in after 30 minutes of me pestering him. With an even bigger audience and someone who had gone to get a video camera, we sat up in the middle of the room, with a sober person putting a couch behind me. P gave me one final chance to back out, but I responded with an intellectual, "Just punch me in the effing face." P wound up and clocked me. I didn't feel it. The crowd called for another. This time he really wound up. Now, after seeing the video, my head snapped back and I flew into the couch. Pleased with myself, we rearranged the room. Sat down, getting praised for another couple of minutes. I then got up and headed to the bathroom. I retched for 2 hours straight, and two people I had never met before in my life put me to bed in my room, which was down 2 flights of stairs. I have since gained the nickname Durds, for Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt's character in Fight Club. Welcome to college indeed. Story 24. Mine was about a week after I moved in, before school even started. It was my freshman year, and I walked into my room because my roommate said he had some girls over. I had just been out with some friends and this girl I was interested in, which comes into play later. Sure enough, when I got in, the girls were already ready. One lived in the same co-ed dorms as us, and the other was a girl he had met at a school event. It wasn't but 2 shots later that the girl from our dorm was on me. I didn't even bother to pay attention to my roommate's luck. We even had a wall created between our beds. It was a wild night with this girl, and after about an hour, I got ready to leave since I still had plans with the other girl I was interested in. I went to another party and then back to her room, which was always a party dorm. That was one hell of a night with her. It was then I knew I was in college. High school was similar, but the difference was that I never had to go home to my parents' house. Story 25. I moved into my dorm room over a week before classes started. I was one of the first new students to arrive for a 4-day orientation to help international students get used to life in America and on campus. After moving all my stuff in and settling down to play music on my computer and putting things away, I heard the most raucous noise. "Freshman? First year here?" The noise continued above me, then down the stairwell across from my room, until the source was outside my door. 2 junior girls who were part of the new student orientation team had heard that new students were on campus 4 days early and wanted to welcome them to hang out with other staff members downstairs. I was confused, kind of scared and bored, so I followed them. This led to me finding the group of friends I would hang out with for 2 years and going to my first college party. Later, during the new student orientation, I threw candy at the incoming freshmen from 7 to 10 in the morning, giving other people their first college experience. Story 26. I started at a small university in Maine in the fall of 2004. My first month or so there was great. Life didn't seem that much different from high school. Then the Red Sox beat the Yankees in the ALCS and were going to the World Series, and that's when I started to see some of the college craziness come out. New Englanders are generally gung-ho about the Red Sox, especially since this was before the voodoo had been broken. Although we didn't want to admit it, we were all terrified that the Red Sox would find some way to screw this up again. The night the Red Sox won the World Series, there was a massive party on the campus mall. One of my classmates lit a broom on fire, in reference to Boston's clean sweep with the Cardinals, and started torching all the trees. Another student was waving around a rake with no control and ended up harming several people in the head. Shortly after, another classmate of mine dumped an entire can of stale beer in my head. That's when I thought, okay, now I'm really in college. Story 27. A couple of days after we moved in, my roommate was looking for the tanning salon. I'd already been in the town for a bit, so I knew where it was. I told her to walk 1 block down the street and it would be on the left. I'd even shown her on Google Street View exactly where it was and what it looked like. After she left, I started writing an essay for class and my phone was on silent. When I checked it later, I saw that she had called a couple of times. I texted her asking if she was okay. A few minutes later, she came storming back in and asked, "Why didn't you answer my calls?" I told her I hadn't known she called because my phone was on silent, and she just said, "No, shut the hell up." It turned out she couldn't find the tanning salon and had tried to call me for help. I went back to writing my essay while she got ready for the gym. When she was ready to go, she said, "I don't want you touching any of my stuff." I asked her why she was mad at me, and she said, "You're a freaking witch. You ignored my calls." I tried to explain to her again that I hadn't ignored her, but she continued to yell at me with the door open, so everyone on the floor could hear her. She then went back to her laptop and made a Facebook status that said, "Gym to cool off before I slap the crap out of my roommate." She then declared that we weren't friends and left. I was so stressed out that I started crying because I didn't know what to do and didn't understand why she was so angry at me. I ended up talking to my RA about what happened, since people had witnessed the incident and she still had the threatening Facebook status. I was able to get a new roommate. That was when I truly felt like I was in college because I had to deal with a crazy roommate, but they also had all the girls on my floor supporting me and being there for me. It was a bittersweet experience. Story 28. It was 11 p.m. and my first Friday night of college. My roommate and I were taking the freshman walk to my car in the furthest parking lot, which was nearly empty. The car pulled up and started cruising next to us. Inside was a woman driving, a passenger who was barely conscious, and a guy with an infant in the back. Everyone except the infant looked to be in their 30s or at least in their 20s and on hard substances. The woman started a conversation. "Y'all looking for a party?" We're going to one," I replied. A stupid freshman. "Y'all want to party with us? You'd have more fun," she said. What?" The guy next to the infant stared at us and licked his lips. "You want to give my friend here your number?" "Where are y'all from?" he asked. We stopped and just stood there. We were on foot and in heels, a good 10-minute walk from anywhere safe. Luckily, a few guys got out of their car 2 rows over at the moment. We called out to them as if we knew them and started walking over. They walked us to my car like champs and then asked if we knew any dealers yet. 2 problems solved. Story 29. I learned and did a lot of new things in college, but one of the most significant and lasting changes has been the lack of body shyness I now have. I remember visiting my sister during my junior year of college. At her apartment, she and her mixed gender friends and neighbors had an open door policy and would often just walk into each other's apartments. One weekend when I was visiting, she had just taken a shower and walked out of the bathroom in a towel as her male neighbor walked in. I was so embarrassed for her. In a towel in front of a boy? I mean, had she no shame? As I learned 2 years later when I went to college, no, she had no shame. And neither do I, apparently. I've lived with boys for the past 3 years and I'll walk around wearing just a towel with no problem. Accidentally fart? They'll get over it. Don't have a garment on? Who gives a crap? As long as they're not staring, it's not worth the extra 15 seconds to shut the door. Boys actually make fantastic roommates. There's none of that stupid girly drama like in my first 2 years. I highly recommend losing your sense of shame and signing a lease with one. Story 30. During my first semester of freshman year, my girlfriend and I were having intimacy in my dorm room when we heard a loud pounding on the door. My girlfriend quickly covered herself and threw on some garments to answer it. Since it was 3 a.m. on a Friday night, I didn't think twice about only being in my garments. Standing in front of me was a girl from the floor above who was completely hammered. She looked me up and down, chuckled, and pushed her way into the room. She lay down on my roommate's empty bed and was sound asleep within about 10 seconds of her head hitting the pillow. The girlfriend sat there with a horrified expression on her face, with a strange, unconscious girl in the room. After getting fully dressed, I tried to wake her up for about 15 minutes before giving up. I picked her up and carried her to her room, where I put her to bed. She woke up just as her head hit the pillow, said, "Silly Mr. Snuffles, the snozzberries are in aisle 15. I went back to sleep. Story 31. My randomly assigned roommate and I went to a party together. We were the only freshmen there, and for our alcohol, we brought a fifth of tequila to drink. Before we even got to the party, we got ready by each drinking a pint of Jägermeister. Predictably, we were some of the first people to arrive since neither of us had been to many parties. The party wore on, and then someone set up a beer pong table. I hadn't played much, but my roommate told me we should be able to handle it. We proceeded to win 9 consecutive games of pong. After winning the 9th game, the crowd decided we weren't intoxicated enough. To combat that, we each chugged a quarter over tequila and started to play. Predictably, we lost. After losing, we were told we had to finish what was left of our bottle. I blacked out after that. I'm still learning new things about what happened that night, but the entire upper class of my school still refers to me as Jose. Story 32. Our first week was orientation, so there were no classes. I didn't know what to expect and was so nervous. On the second day, we were all woken up by our second-year mentors banging on our doors and yelling. We came out and were whisked away to a kegger at 8 a.m., where they were also serving free pancakes. We were all hammered by 11 a.m. and came back to the residence hall to play in a beer pong tournament. My partner chugged a glass of rum, cola, and milk mixed together and passed out by about 4 in the afternoon. In the words of the immortal poet Asher Roth, I love college. Story 33. On my third day in the residence halls, someone set the school on fire around the corner. My entire flat went out to view it. We ended up staying there until we were told to move along. Most of the halls were evacuated. I don't know why our block wasn't. We were confined to our place until they called in all clear because of asbestos in the air. That night, I made friends with everyone in our block as we crowded into one guy's bedroom to watch movies. They also saved 5 of us from being unable to go home that night. We'd gone out to get food and weren't allowed back inside by the police, who told us to go back where we came from. It took me arguing with them for 5 minutes and everyone else panicking before we could finally go home. Story 34. Another college memory that really affected me happened in mid-September during my first semester. But then I had made a group of friends, and most of them were frequent smokers. So we would usually hang out late at night by a gazebo. One night, one of them pointed out that Daytona Beach was only a half-hour drive away, so at around 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, we all loaded up into cars and drove to the beach. We ran around on the shore, and some of us even went swimming. I don't know if many of you have tried this, but being on a beach at 1 a.m. with a full moon is possibly the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. We got back at maybe 3 or 4 a.m. on a school night, crashed, and still managed to get up for class the next morning. Story 35. In my first year of college, I was placed in a dorm room directly across from the resident advisor, or RA. As a result, I didn't get to have many parties. For my second year, I applied for suite housing. It cost a little more, but you got a shared fridge, a living space, 2 bathrooms, and lived with 5 to 7 other people, and guess what? My suite was right next door to the RA. She didn't do much to manage the building, but was a strict enforcer of the rules. She asked for people who weren't rule breakers, so that's what she got. A group of new transfer students and my old roommate and me. Finally, I thought, screw this, I want a party. Applied for an on-campus housing again for the same type of suite. This time it was placed right above the RA's room. I was thinking, holy crap, why does this always happen to me? So the next year I rented a house with 6 other people and it was the best time of my life. Those moments with the RAs were when I truly realized I was in college. Story 36. My first week, before classes started, I was invited to my first ever party. It was a fraternity party with a blacklight theme, and I was handed a bottle of White Wolf vodka. I proceeded to chug a quarter of the bottle, which was about 7 to 9 shots. Since I'd never been intoxicated before, I blacked out in a matter of minutes. I was later told that I made out with 2 random girls, one of whom had a long-distance boyfriend. I was also on the kitchen island dancing with some other girls before finally passing out in an empty hot tub outside. I woke up the next morning outside with no shirt or shoes, sunburned and holding a football. The guys told me I had been yelling, "Colt McCoy," and running around. Hello, college. Do you have a freshman roommate story? I went to a school where the general population was a bit weirder than the rest of the country. In this eccentric community, some students even we considered odd. Those kids did not like to hang out with my roommate. As best as I can describe, he was like a child in a child's body. He was a grimy little thing, but with the age of someone in college. Don't get me wrong, the kid was brilliant, but he was terrible at life. I'll start my description with how I got to know him. He scratched a lot, noisily, and mainly in his face. He talked to himself, and not the kind of self-affirming talk I do, but more like a Gollum to Smeagol conversation. We had public bathrooms and showers for our entire hall. He was caught fiddling in them on multiple occasions. How? Let's just say he was very vocal about it. He also developed a horrendous snoring problem the week of finals. He was incredibly intolerant and sexist and frequently alluded to SA in conversation. Overall, I would describe him as creepy with a side of grime. Story 2. I had 2 roommates who kept eating all my food. Within the first week before classes had even started, I went to make myself my first peanut butter sandwich in the dorm. The whole jar was gone. They left the empty container in my cupboard. I was furious. Who eats an entire jar of peanut butter by themselves without even introducing themselves? These girls would literally scarf down all my food and then complain if they thought anyone was touching theirs. So I started buying really fattening foods like donuts, hoping to teach them self-restraint. However, these 2 would go through an entire box in just 2 days. I kept buying more donuts, and then one day they started complaining about how they couldn't fit into their jeans. Success. I also put laxatives in my peanut butter. Story 3. I walked into my dorm room for the first time freshman year and saw my new roommate standing in the middle of the room, screaming at his dad. My roommate was yelling about not wanting to go to college and blaming his mom for writing his college essay and filling out the application. His dad called my roommate an ungrateful piece of crap and threatened him if he tried to leave. It was only after his dad finished speaking that they realized I was in the room. They both immediately pretended nothing had happened, shook my hand and introduced themselves. Luckily, my parents had not walked in with me, so they did not have to see that and be worried. Eventually, my parents met his as they helped me set up the room and talked about how proud they were of us. My roommate's dad kept saying things like, "It's either college or the street, because I'm not paying to support a failure." My parents, of course, thought he was joking. Every day, this kid told me how much he hated school. He would never go to class, drink in the room all day with the door open, even though we were on a dry campus. Scream at everyone, party all night, and generally just be a schmuck. He used to watch VH1 until 4 a.m. with the volume so loud you could not hear anything else. When I asked him to turn it down because I couldn't hear, he said he would if I would wrestle him. It turned out he was serious. He wanted to wrestle me just because I asked him to turn down the Brett Michaels Rock of Love show. I declined and went to bed. The next day he called his mom to come get him. She agreed and said she was getting in the car, but she never came. He lost his mind and broke everything he owned. He punched a hole through his TV, slammed his Guitar Hero controllers on the ground repeatedly, threw his Xbox out the window, cracked his cell phone in half, and ripped his bed sheets. He basically totaled his side of the room. I left the room during all of this, assuming he was just blowing off steam and not knowing he was breaking his stuff. I walked back into a war zone, with him standing in the middle of the room, crying, drinking laundry detergent, and yelling about how he wanted to pass away and that he had taken a whole bottle of Advil after he broke his things. I ran to get the RA and he grabbed the broken glass and plastic shards from his computer monitor and started hurting himself. The RA and I entered the room to the skid retching detergent. The cops were called and they fed him charcoal to prevent him from passing away due to the detergent. He left that night. He woke me up to say goodbye and the last thing he said to me was, "Goodbye, Jay Quack. Sorry about ruining your birthday." I swear to God, this story is 100% true. And so is the part where we tried to bring a gun in later to end me, but that's a different story. Story 4. My roommate freshman year was a nightmare. The moment we first met, I knew I was doomed. On move-in day, she was berating her father, a doctor. She accused the moving staff of stealing her jewelry. "You don't steal, do you?" was her greeting to me. After our families left, she quickly responded to an email from her psychiatrist and asked me when I planned on dropping out so she could use my bed as a couch. She was rude and was always loudly talking on the phone with her boyfriend. I woke up one night and they were having phone intimacy. Her side of the room was disgusting and she told everyone on my floor that I was crazy and jealous of her because I was poor. My first few weeks of college were tough enough, and having to deal with her was wearing me down. I coped the only way I knew how. I wrote in what I thought was an anonymous online journal. I wrote about the phone intimacy, her entitlement, and how miserable it was all making me. She found the journal, used an out-of-school email address to threaten me with. I brought it to the resident director, who asked to see what I had written. At the end of the day, I was told that I had a problem with depression and anger and needed to get mandatory counseling and sign a safety contract, saying that I would not hurt myself or others. However, I was allowed to move into a single room. The girl ended up going crazy. She holed herself up in a room, never went to classes, dropped out, and had a kid. I graduated, so I guess I win. Story 5. I've had some terrible roommates. Aside from letting their cats and ferrets messing on the floor for months without cleaning it, leaving crusty pots and pans on the stove a week after cooking, and one of them retching in her bed and not cleaning it up for 3 days. Yes, she did sleep in it. I had one other particularly memorable moment. I was sitting in the living room trying to get some studying done when one of them came out of her room and burped in my face after giving her boyfriend a whistle. I think that was the final straw. Story 6. My roommate during my orientation or summer semester was a mild World of Warcraft and anime nerd. She told me from day one that she wasn't into drama or fake hanging out group time and that she liked to relax. I would get along great. Since we had identical schedules, studying was going to be a breeze. The program was 5 weeks long. First week went well. We hung out, shared notes, and studied together. We made geeky jokes, commented on the vanity of some of her classmates, and watched bad ghost hunting TV shows. Everything was fine. However, after a week and a half, I began to realize that our personalities were a little too well matched. My roommate never left the room, ever. We went out to dinner one night and lingered for half an hour every few days to get a coffee, but other than that, she was pretty much a potted plant in the dorm room. No amount of coaxing or invitation from myself or her friends could get her to hang out. After a while, I started to feel a lot of pent-up energy. She was a light sleeper, and even stealthy fiddling was enough to wake her up. I tried in the shower, but that wasn't very successful. The dorm showers weren't exactly a private setting. My only hope was to get her out of the room for any amount of time, but it was as if she was a sadist. Her showers were 5 minutes, like lightning. Bathroom trips were usually 3 minutes. Her food she only went out when I did. Otherwise, she ate from the boxes of food she had brought with her. When it came to studying, she would only go out when I did. Otherwise, she studied alone or with me in the room. Finally, a friend and I hatched a plan to get her out. He was going to drag her to sushi for dinner, even if it meant kicking and screaming. The plan was to pretend to have a study session with one of my friends in the room, a person she didn't like. Everything was set until the morning of the day we had planned to get her out. In one of her classes, we watched a video, an essay, in sociology. Our teacher made it very clear in an almost uncomfortable way that students who were bothered by the content were free to walk out for a minute, and there were on-campus support groups. During a 5-minute break in the 3-hour class, she turned to my friend and me and admitted that she almost started crying. She then nonchalantly commented that she wondered if there were any support groups on campus. She got up to quietly speak with our professor. In other words, she had just informed me, all but explicitly, that she was a victim. This entire time, I had thoughts my roommate was sadistic and didn't understand my blatant hints about needing personal time. It turned out she was a victim who was terrified of being around people she didn't intimately trust. Needless to say, I went the entire semester without a single successful schlick. My morality guilt-tripped me the entire time about being so bitter toward her. Story 7. My roommate and I shared a hall with a guy who was, to put it mildly, an experience. When we were moving in, I did the standard get-to-know-you rounds. Everyone seemed cool except for this one guy. He was very antisocial, greasy, and smelled awful. Since he was in a wheelchair, he had his own bathroom, so we didn't see much of him. After the first couple of weeks, everything was fine, and then the odor started. It quite literally smelled like crap. After some sniff searching, we concluded that it was coming from the smelly wheelchair guy's SWG's room. We complained to the RA about it, and they installed an air freshener in the hallway. Naturally, just masked the odor from crap and flowers. It got so bad that girls refused to come to our room because of the smell. That was the last straw, and we demanded he be moved. Thankfully, after winter break, SWG was gone, and we finally found out the source of the smell. It turns out the guy wore adult diapers, so he had bowel issues, which is not a big deal. However, whereas a normal person would dispose of a soiled diaper, this kid put them in a duffel bag underneath his bed and kept them there. He had accumulated quite a collection. Multiple duffel bags. Once he moved out, they had to tear up the carpet, strip and repaint the walls, and fumigate the room. Story 8. My roommate freshman year was really cool, for the first semester. We both liked video games and most of the same music, and we generally got along well. We were even both majoring in the same subject, so that was cool. The first semester went by very smoothly. Then came the second semester. We got back from the holidays, and he went home for the first weekend after break. He came back on Saturday afternoon and seemed upset, so I asked him what was wrong. Well, he never told me the full story, but his girlfriend had broken up with him. After that, it all went to crap. He would play Call of Duty and scream at the television. I mean, he would yell at the game as if it had just violated his grandmother in front of him. This was all happening on my Xbox, TV, and internet. He only had 2 Ethernet ports and no wireless, so I would let him use my internet for Xbox Live if I wasn't there, and I'd let him finish a couple of games after I got back before making him return my internet. We got food, most notably sushi with a very generous amount of soy sauce, and leave his trash on my desk, on my freaking computer, getting soy sauce all over it. Luckily, it was only on the outside, but I was still very angry. I left all sorts of other trash on my desk and on my bed, which I had to make him clean up. He seemed oblivious to it. Dude, clean your freaking trash off my crap. Seriously. This has got to stop. Oh, my bad, I didn't notice, he would say. He would also wake up at 3 a.m. and start watching World of Warcraft videos on YouTube at full blast, and he seemingly didn't notice that I was in the room. Again, oh, sorry dude, my bad. If he wasn't in bed by 9 o'clock, he would come at home 1 or 2 in the morning, turn the light on and get on the phone. And once again, he would say, oh, sorry, my bad. In addition to leaving his trash everywhere, he just threw all of his stuff, like clothes, books, papers, and gadgets, under his bed, which eventually spread out into such a massive pile that I couldn't open our dorm room door. When he went to bed at 9 p.m., I wasn't even tired. I would turn my computer brightness all the way down and plug in my headphones so he could sleep, but it would just wake up and tell me to shut it off. I replied, look, it's only 9:30. You live with another person. I try to be as considerate as I can, but a little bit of computer glow isn't going to end you. Where are those eye-covering things you bought 3 weeks ago? Oh, I forgot I had those, he replied. Needless to say, it really sucked. Story 9. This isn't a story about my freshman roommate, but my wife's. The girl had no social life of her own outside of one friend who would corner you and wouldn't shut up. Having no social lives or dating lives of their own, they took it upon themselves to start stalking me online. Suddenly, I was getting tons of hits on websites they'd put together from their dorm's network. They didn't realize I could track that. They were also showing up and citing guest books on old GeoCity sites I'd made in high school and other weird stuff. One time I forgot my laptop in the room. The roommate decided it would be hilarious to turn it on, go through my stuff, download a bunch of gay porn, and set some of it as the desktop background on my machine. This all happened in the 10 minutes it took me to get to my car. Realized I didn't have my computer and walked back up to their room. She ended up downloading a vial of malwares along with all that gay porn and had to wipe the hard drive. Most roommates have the courtesy to knock on the door late at night on a weekend if they know their roommate is with their significant other, but not these two. They would unlock the door as quickly as possible, burst in and turn on the lights with grins on their faces, hoping to find us in a compromising position. They never were because we knew they would pull that stunt. The roommate would sit on my wife's bed eating food and watching TV instead of her own. She would also go through my wife's stuff when she didn't think she would be around. One day, my wife came home to find that her hairbrush had been picked clean. The roommate's friend had decided to clean it for her to be nice. Never found out what happened to the hair, but I prayed to the FSM that it just went to the trash and not a hair doll. Now that I've read all of this again, I realized just how creepy those two were. Story 10. I noticed my roommate was off at the beginning of the year. He'd always say things like, I have 3 AK-47s back in my house. If I fail a test, I'm going to bring them here. I then just laughed it off, saying he was kidding. He would also say things like, if I were to end you, I would do it with a knife because no one would ever be able to find out about it. These were just freaky things that I would laugh off. And one night he decided to take pills while crying and saying, screw this place. I ran out of the room and immediately went to the RA, but when we got back, he was gone. He ran to a friend's dorm room and eventually went to the hospital. When he was at the hospital, the police searched her room and found 3 months' worth of medication for bipolar disorder, 3 dozen knives stashed around the room, and his diary, which stated, if my roommate wasn't such a nice kid, he would be coming down with me tonight. Then when he got out of the hospital, he started texting me things like, hello roommate, how are things at insert home address here? Haven't heard from you in a long time. I think I'm going to have to come pay you and your parents a visit at insert home address here. I was in a messed up place for about 3 months after this happened. Story 11. My 6 roommates and I moved into a pretty old house in a very empty and secluded area. In Google Maps, it is still labeled as a mental health institute. Crazy, right? Anyway, it was Christmas and everyone but one housemate was gone. I just arrived back and was walking to my room when the other housemate intercepted me. He asked if I knew if anyone else was back. He said he had heard sounds coming from the room downstairs. I laughed and said, no man, it must be the birds or something. Then we both went silent as we heard running in my room on the other side of the door and then running on the rooftops. I walked in and the window was wide open. We both just looked at each other and said, nope. We ended up sleeping in the living room with the lights on for 3 whole nights. Story 12. The first place I lived on campus was in a suite with 3 other girls. My actual roommate was nice enough, but she constantly listened to a playlist with about 20 awful country songs, even while she slept. It was on a continuous loop. If she ever listened to other music, she would flip out and run over to turn off the volume if a song with a bad word came on. Then she and the other 2 girls got angry with me because I wouldn't go to church or non-drinking parties with them. I ended up moving to the honors dorm, where things were slightly more normal. Story 13. I once had a roommate whose room stank like nothing else. I could even smell it from the hallways as I passed his closed door. It was like being smacked in the face by a wall of cheese. I figured it was body odor or perhaps the ethnic food he ate, so I didn't say anything to avoid sounding rude. Well, he moved out 2 months later and a new roommate moved in. While cleaning the room, we discovered he had not thrown out the garbage the entire time he was there. He just kept all the rotting trash in a wooden chest and overflowing garbage bins. Not only that, he washed his laundry only once every 6 weeks or so, which undoubtedly contributed to the smell. He gave me the shivers just thinking about it. Story 14. I got along pretty well with my freshman roommate, but we were both really competitive and had a long-standing rivalry over who was the champion of the room. Fast forward to the end of the year, and I decided I needed to prove that I was the champion once and for all. I went online and bought a trophy declaring myself the champion of the room. I told my roommate that I was definitively the champion and that he would soon find out why. He didn't believe me at first, but I could tell he was getting nervous. The day the trophy arrived, I quietly picked it up from the mailroom and left it on his desk while he was at class. He didn't talk to me for about 3 days. A week or so later, he got angry at me for something I can't remember and decided he had to get back at me. Since he was a buffoon, he did what he knew best and took a dump in my trophy. I made him wash it out with his bare hands. I still have the trophy today, and I'm still the champion. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 15. I was the horrible roommate. In our dorm, we each had our own rooms, but each pair of rooms shared a sink room with a sink, mirror, and 2 sets of shelves. My sink mate was a junior when I was a freshman and already knew the ropes. Our very old building had a problem with the plumbing backing up and pushing greasy, nasty black water into our sinks. This happened several times throughout the year. The first time it happened was only a couple of days into the semester before I had gotten to know my sink mate. I went to the sink room and found the sink coated with black grime. I assumed my sink mate had poured something nasty down the drain and had not washed it out afterward. I put a sticky note in the mirror that said, "Could you please clean the sink?" The next time I looked, it had been clean. A couple of weeks later, it happened again, and I again put a note in the mirror. The next time I looked, the sink was clean, and there was a note for me in the mirror that said, "I don't mind cleaning the sink, but just so you know, I'm not making the mess. It's the pipes backing up," with a little smiley face. I felt like the biggest schmuck. After that, I got to know her, and we had a great friendship that year. It mostly consisted of her teaching me a lot of things I'd been sheltered from in my very Christian upbringing, putting up with a lot of annoying questions and letting me hang out in her room with her friends since I didn't have any. Story 16. My freshman year roommate became really depressed as the first semester wore on and the second semester began. She never left the dorm, was often still in bed when I got back from class, and eventually left to get her life together. While all of that made me feel bad for her, I could not overlook, or rather oversmell, one thing. She rarely showered since she rarely got out of bed, and when it was her time of the month, you could smell the red liquid from her side of the room. It was truly revolting. Story 17. Yes, I have a story. My roommate had her boyfriend stay over nearly all the time. He was basically my third roommate. I walked in on them having intimacy once, and another morning, their blanket was slightly ajar. Their bed was lofted above mine, and I saw his jewels hanging off the edge of the bed. Speaking of the bed, before we moved mine across the room, we had them in a semi-bonked L shape. When we moved my bed, there was a used protection under the side where my head lay, just sitting there. Oh, and one night, I was having a hard time sleeping, and they came in. They went to shower together in the adjoining bathroom. They came back, they got into her lofted bed, and I heard her climb down into her intimate drawer before climbing back up. I heard the sound of her protection tearing open and needed to alert them that I was awake, so I sat up, started coughing, and then lay back down facing the wall. Thankfully, I heard her throw the protection in the trash. All was quiet, and I was able to fall asleep. Sometimes when I was reading, she would get about a hand's distance from my face and just stare at me. I asked her what the hell she was doing, and she said, "Observing." She also often asked me if I loved her, like she was my mom or something. One morning, I was getting ready for a 3-hour lab, and she woke up and went to a lengthy monologue about her dream. I was tuning it out and left midway through to make it to class. When I got back, she started exactly where she left off. It was creepy, like a robot. Story 18. I really did like my freshman year roommate. She was a sweet person. However, this story always wins whenever my friends and I share who had the craziest freshman year roommate. My roommate had a long-distance boyfriend who was a senior in high school and lived about 4 hours away from college. He always had problems in their relationship. A few months into the year, she began to suspect he was cheating on her, and she discovered that he was. He broke up with her and started dating another girl in his hometown. My roommate was pretty angry about this and wanted to win him back. She continued to visit him in his hometown and sleep with him on the weekends behind the other girl's back, but here's the crazy part. She decided she needed to get pregnant to win him back. She secretly stopped taking birth control, bought about 1 billion pregnancy tests, and secretly did hip thrust exercises after having intimacy with him to increase her chances of getting pregnant. This was all despite my constant nagging that this was not a good plan. Lo and behold, 3 months later, she got pregnant. She dropped out of school right before spring finals to live at home and date this guy who eventually dumped her again and ended up marrying someone else. The baby was pretty cute though. Story 19. My freshman roommate was, for lack of a better word, a nightmare. It took me a while to realize it because I'm a bit socially oblivious, so I ended up living with her for 2 years. Here's the short version of our time together. She declared us best friends on move-in day. We both developed crushes on the same guy, and she made a friendship pact with me that neither of us would pursue him. 4 days later, they were together. Once, she and her boyfriend convinced me to go to a party at a nearby school. He drove and made her promise they wouldn't leave without me because my phone was broken. I didn't know anyone else there. They left without me and had to walk 5 miles back in the rain. When he found out what she had done, he felt awful, but she said it was my fault for not having a phone. She hated everyone, purposely alienated my friends, and talked behind my back. I found out years later that she was also the one who was cheating on her boyfriend, even though she accused everyone around us of being cheating witches. Her boyfriend paid her tuition for 2 semesters because she had chronic money troubles caused by her own irresponsibility. Another mutual friend also paid her tuition once because she had strung him along romantically for months but didn't find him attractive enough to sleep with. The boyfriend also tutored her and did all of her homework for her because she couldn't pass a class to save her life. She claimed to have severe test anxiety and failed all her exams. She would constantly ask me for my grades for the sole purpose of getting angry and passive-aggressive. During a mental breakdown of finals week, she told me that her boyfriend was the only reason she hadn't failed out. They did her assignments and lab write-ups, and her test scores, which were 30 to 50%, were just barely enough to get a C- in most classes. She also hinted that she slept with her TAs for extra credit and, at one point, with project partners in exchange for doing work. She never took responsibility for anything. She got her license suspended because she thought she could get away with not paying a speeding ticket. She gained 40 pounds and blamed it on her birth control, even though she had eaten nothing but cheese pizza and Pop-Tarts for the previous 6 months. After all this, she had the audacity to call me a dumb witch for getting a boyfriend and changing my major. Thankfully, I'm not living with her anymore, although I still see her around. Story 20. My freshman year of college, I ended up with a roommate who had a combination of these traits. He showered roughly every 6 or 7 days. He only did laundry when he went home for breaks like Thanksgiving, Christmas, Labor Day, or spring break. Because of this, my room smelled horrible. It got so bad that some of the girls on the floor would come in and talk to him to make sure he was keeping a shower schedule. Even they gave up after a few weeks. The RA tried, and he would usually shower when the RA told him to, but even that was a temporary solution. My roommate also played the electric guitar with an amplifier. I had not yet found a YouTube video that adequately sounds like his playing, but basically picture that video that popped up on Reddit titled, "What It's Like to Work in a Music Shop," where multiple people are playing the guitar simultaneously. It was rather similar to that, except it was just one person and much louder. I almost ended him when he woke me up at 3 a.m. playing that damn guitar. The guitar guys on the floor tried to teach him, but he kept getting too frustrated and gave up. He was hated by the entire floor because he wouldn't use his guitar without his amp plugged in and volume turned up. When it came to food, I hid anything and everything I brought in because he had a policy of, if it's in the open, I will eat it. I guess sophomore year, he lived in a place with 4 or 5 other guys, and when all but him left for Thanksgiving break, he stayed and emptied out the apartment of all his snack food. So why didn't I change roommates? Because my freshman year was pretty cool, and my roommates' habits kept me out of my room except for sleeping. The rest of the floor was a cool group of people I didn't want to lose. Story 21. My freshman roommate was awesome our first semester. He was a good friend, a good roommate, and generous and thoughtful. We would study and play video games together, and I was starting to consider him a brother. Then the second semester came around. I guess he decided he needed a more active social life. The only way he knew how to make friends was with partying and substances. It started slowly at first, but by the middle of the semester, he'd bring people back to the condo to get intoxicated or spiked on anything. We had a friend who was a user. This would happen at any time of the day, and more often than not, he'd have people over on multiple weekdays for late-night, substance-fueled parties. By that time, he'd stopped going to classes, washing dishes, or cleaning the house, so that was pretty terrible. He skipped all of his finals and chose to party on the nights before I had mine, so I was prone to spend my nights elsewhere. He ended up dropping out, and I got a new roommate who's a bit of a slob, but otherwise okay. I'd spend entire days in the bathtub with his laptop and bong. He once disappeared for a week, only to come back and do substances with a bunch of people. He spiked my drinks at one party to such an excess that I have about a 5-hour blank spot in my memory from which a few tales were generated. He yelled at me for pouring out a glass of bourbon he had left on the stairs for over a week when I went to do the dishes. Apparently he was saving it. He talked a few of his friends into having intimacy in my bed while I was gone for the weekend. Then, knowing the guy had finished all over my sheets, he probably did not wash them or even think to inform me for about a month. I recognized that they were disheveled when I got back and washed them out of suspicion, but still, not telling me was pretty messed up. Story 22. I'm pretty sure I was the horror story. My roommate was a nice enough guy, but kind of weird. He smelled a little, but you had to be right next to him to notice. He was very religious and would often invite me to church. All 3 days a week that he went, even though I politely declined every time. He was a bit of a recluse, though he did have friends. He was always more concerned with World of Warcraft than going out and acted like I was some kind of prophet when I told him he'd be happier if he accepted every invitation he got rather than prioritizing raids. None of that really bothered me. I was a weird guy too, but he did one thing that I absolutely could not stand. He listened to stuff as he went to sleep. Not soothing classical music or whale sounds, which I could have dealt with. No, He listened to awful comedy tracks and loud, crappy Christian rock. I asked him if he could turn it down or maybe pick up more soothing stuff. He said that this was the only way he knew how to get to sleep. I consider myself a very calm person, in some cases too calm, but I am extremely protective of my sleep. That is my time, and if you mess with it, you can expect me to mess right back. So I convinced him I was insane. The incident I remember most was walking into the room, having a conversation with him, picking up something off my desk and walking out. I stood out there for a couple of minutes, walked back in and tried to repeat the conversation. When he pointed out that we had already done this, I looked at the item in my hand in shock, then sat at my desk facing the wall for 5 minutes. I did other things, like muttering and thrashing about randomly, and I told him about my relatives who were in institutions, which was actually true. Eventually, he got the picture. Once I felt he was convinced, I asked if he wanted to switch with a friend of mine who also hated his roommate, and he, of course, jumped at the chance of a sane roommate. The switch was made, and we enjoyed ourselves in my room, but he came to me a few weeks later and wanted to know if I would switch back. Apparently, my friend had not been telling me the full story about how bad his roommate was. It was nasty over there. It stank. There was moldy food and most of the stuff you hear about in the rest of this thread. I told him no and wished him luck finding another roommate. Story 23. My senior year, I had 2 freshman roommates. One was a pretty boy band student. Since the music department was full of gay men, it was only a matter of time before this kid was coerced into batting for the other team. He got intoxicated at a party and went home with a teaching assistant from one of his classes. The guy essentially yes-ate him. My roommate begged him to make it not hurt, so the guy used grape jelly he found in the kitchen to use. It's a true story. He came home crying and I knew exactly what had happened. Story 24. My freshman roommate was this Korean kid who only hung out with other Koreans. He did not sleep in the dorms half the time because he was out at friends' places all the time. He once came back intoxicated and whizzed into my white garbage can, thinking it was a toilet. One night at about 3 in the morning, he came back insanely intoxicated, holding a plastic grocery bag which he left on the floor. His phone started ringing, so for no apparent reason, he kicked in the bathroom door while one of my suite mates was taking a shower. My suite mate nervously said, I'm in the shower. But my roommate ignored him, answered the phone, and started yelling at someone in Korean. He walked back into the room, still on the phone, checked his pocket, and asked, Where's my phone? Where the heck is my phone? While on the phone, desperately searching the room for the phone he was literally holding, he flipped his desk over, throwing everything on it across the floor. As he was pacing the room, he unnecessarily kicked a garbage can over and tripped over his laundry basket, so in retaliation, he threw it across the room. He left, yelling down the hall in Korean. Anyways, I went back to sleep, and when I woke up, the floor was covered in a mixture of trash, books, laundry, and empty water bottles. As I tried to walk through the room, I stepped in the bag and it exploded. It left a bag of wretch on the floor. I got so used to not seeing him that one day I realized I had not seen him in over a week. As soon as I realized that, I got a little worried and started texting people, asking if anyone had seen him recently. Right at that moment, he walked in wearing the same clothes he was wearing a week ago, looking really angry with a bunch of bruises. Without saying anything, he just grabbed a Sprite and left. Afterward, I did not see him again for a few days. Story 25. My freshman roommate, named Hans, was far from the sausage-eating, beer-drinking German man we thought he would be. Our first clue was the 15 to 20 bottles of medication in his medicine cabinet. His mother would drive about an hour every week to resupply his medication. That was just the tip of the iceberg, though. About a month into the school year, Hans joined the fencing club. Keep in mind that Hans was heavy and would come back from practice literally dripping in his own sweat. Immediately after changing out of his practice clothes, we'd go straight to bed, still sweaty and smelly. While this was gross, we didn't really care. It was his bed, and he could do whatever he wanted. About a month after that, we were sitting around after class when he wasn't there, talking about who had to clean the bathroom next. After some discussion about how disgusting the room smelled, we realized that none of us had ever seen Hans use the shower. To reaffirm our suspicion, we stapled his towel to the wall in a few places. We figured if he was showering while we were all in class, then the staples would be pulled out. Fast forward another month, and the staples were still in the wall. The room reeked, and we bought a ton of wall plugs and Febreze to cover it up, but nothing really worked. At this point, Hans had not bathed in over 3 months. We sat down with him multiple times and told him we knew he wasn't showering. After continually denying it, we finally decided to go to the RA. Eventually, we all had to go to mediation with the RA. There was yelling, and he finally agreed to shower, although it was still a rarity for the rest of the year. The smell got a little better, but I could still never have any friends over. Story 26. This person wasn't even my roommate. We just shared a kitchen. I bought an expensive block of Parmesan cheese and put it in the fridge for my own grating pleasure. The next day, it was gone. Angry as heck, I went on a rampage, looking through the entire kitchen. I finally found it in some anonymous person's food cupboard, half eaten. Now who eats half a block of cheese and leaves it unrefrigerated? A cheese-stealing schmuck who stole my cheese. That's who. I never found out what this person looked like, and I was heartily annoyed when they left or sneakily moved cupboards. Either way, it was a terrible thing to do, and they didn't even bother to finish the whole block of Parmesan. Story 27. Let's just call him Paul. Paul had a variety of unfortunate habits. They included loud, obnoxious singing that went on all day and working out in our small two-person bedroom, which made the entire apartment smell like a gym. But it didn't stop there. Paul was also a bit of a raging homosexual. No big deal, right? Diversity is part of the college experience. Well, I'm pretty sure the college experience isn't supposed to include waking up in the middle of the night with your roommate stroking your arm. It also shouldn't include having CDs slid covertly under the bathroom door while you're getting in and out of the shower. No, Paul, those things are not supposed to happen. Story 28. I was about to go to bed pretty late during my first night at my dorm and had just turned off the lights. My roommate came in a little bit later, assumed I was asleep, and brought his friends in. They whispered to each other about pant sizes and not actually being a size small and giggled while I heard buns clicking. I was too nervous to confront my roommate about this and somehow blacked out from the anxiety of what to do. Growing up, I was pretty conservative about physical relations and had not lost my V-card, so hearing all of this was new to me. A Filipino Catholic who had not so much as kissed a girl before. Also, my roommate was gay, so to make a long story short, my first night in college, I had to force myself to fall asleep to the sounds of guy-on-guy intimacy. And that is how I learned what it sounds like. Story 29. My freshman roommate only left her room for class and food. He would wake up 15 minutes before class, go out, and be back 10 minutes after class ended. Every weekend, he would be in the room, except when he went home. He also didn't do laundry. Every 3 weeks, he would load up his clothes and drive home for his mom to wash them. Those weekends were the only time I was ever alone in my room for more than a couple of hours. In addition to never leaving, he had no personality, but no interests, no hobbies, didn't listen to music and was a bit off. He was just a little slow and wasn't very knowledgeable about social norms. After the first 2 quarters, I moved out and all of my friends gave me a hard time about it. Over the summer after my freshman year, several of my friends studied abroad. It turns out that my old roommate did too. When they got back, the people who had spent the summer with him came up and apologized for giving me a hard time about moving out. Story 30. There were 5 of us in a shared apartment-style dorm. One of us was Ted, who was 6'10" and 300 pounds. Ted would get seriously intoxicated on the weekends, but he was not hostile or mean in any way. What he was incredibly creepy. He would walk into your room around 2 a.m., completely oblivious to his surroundings, and begin to scavenge your room for food. He would go through drawers and dig through the mini fridge. Talking to him made no difference. He was essentially intoxicated sleepwalking, and this went on for a whole year. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.